Welcome. How's it going?
Oh, no
Yeah.
phones, but I'm here.
Indeed.
Trying to do it. I'm here. I
Mhm.
go on, stop the video for a second. I'm going to get back on.
All right, cool.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Hey, Jackie.
Hey, that's an impressive backdrop.
Well, you know, I work on my stuff every day.
Very nice. Yes. All right, Tanya, good to see you. Kanaya, good to see you face to face.
Yeah.
Good to see President Haley is in the house. Marcus, good to see you. Sean, got the Alpha Psi representing there. Thank you. Okay, so we're expecting about 60 participants. So we will give a few minutes for folks to come on. Welcome everyone who's on so far. If you want, for folks who are there in the participant area, if you want to put your name and your branch name in there just to kind of give a shout out to let us know you're there, since we can only see ourselves as panelists, then that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Coney. Hi, Ms. Melvin. Good to see you. Phil Maples representing. I am Lynn, Hillsborough County. Yes, indeed. Franklin, George Williams, Davette Thompson, Beverly. Always good to hear you. In fact, I met someone today who lives in Orlando, and I told her to connect with you all. I wasn't sure if the branch meeting information was on the Facebook page, but she's trying hard to contact you. Brevard's in the house. Raquel, it was going faster than I could read. Pensacola, yes. And Conley, Williams, Daniela Pierre, Ruby Jenkins. Great, thank you, Sister Beverly. I'll be sure to connect her via email if she's not able to make it to the meeting or put the meeting information. Dr. Jones, again, Marcus. Brother Lewis, great to hear you as always. Nancy, you're back again after last night, thank you. Reed Blair, I think I've said all the folks who are on Okaloosa County, yes. Okay, good. So we're getting there, 42 participants. We're not gonna wait that long just because we've got such a heavy schedule. So Andrew Thompson, Jacksonville, John Jr., Manatee County, and Darrell Campbell. Great, thank you. And raised his hand. Let's see. Thank you. Let me see if I can answer. Okay. Oh, attendees and allowed to talk. Okay. Mr. Ferdinand?
Yes.
Okay, we're ready. Did you have a question or?
No.
Oh, okay, okay. I thought you had a question. I because you raised your hand. Okay, you were just saying hi. Well, welcome. Thank you very much. It's good to hear you. Okay, Mr. Knowlton, I'm gonna see if you had a question. Oops. So, okay, Mr. Zebby Atkinson.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I don't see my video and all those other buttons that I usually see down here.
Yeah. So what is this webinar format? The only people who have video are the panelists because. Okay. Yeah, because otherwise, if all the folks had video, it would take up so much bandwidth, and some of us computers would kind of burn out and so forth.
Come on now, y'all got me on this Zoom thing. I'm trying to see everybody.
I know.
All right, good enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. All right. So I think we're going to get started. Okay, so is President Nwezi on via phone?
Does somebody need
Give
to
her a
call?
few. Yes, I'm getting her on now.
Okay.
That's your job, Tori.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Used to be my job, but it's your job now.
Yes, sir.
All right. Oh, there's a few late breaking folks. Okay, I'm gonna get them on while you're getting President Nwezi on. People have been turning in their certificates right up until the very last here. So it's been an adventure. So I have about 6 more people to try to let in. All right. Okay, Germany Dixon should be joining us soon. And we already have Sean. We already have Mr. Sabu. John Walker also. John Walker, yes, also joining. And George Collins and Aisha Nash. All right. So maybe while we're waiting for, President Nwezi, because of time, we might want to have Chairman Russell bring greetings.
Yes.
Okay, let's just do that. So let me just welcome one more person on who is locked out, and then we'll do that. George Collins. Okay. That is good. All right. So without further ado, it's again a pleasure to have you all as part of the webinar here. And welcome to the inaugural class of the NAACP Equity and Emergency Management and Climate Resilience Certification Program. You have all already traversed so much to get you to where you are in terms of the rigorous FEMA certification process. Thank you to everybody who endured the 2.5-hour sessions that we did on Saturday and Sunday. Those were definitely a comedy hour, to say the least. We have recordings if anybody wants to listen to that, but you have made it far. So thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to taking this journey with you, not only over the next 3 nights, but also as you pass through the other 2 tiers of the course. So I'm going to give the floor to Chairman Russell to give greetings. I know he has another meeting to attend. Thank you so much, Chairman Russell.
Thank you, Jackie. And let me first of all, Jackie, thank you for all of your commitment and all of the work that you do in making our ECJ program the great success that it is. We should all give you a hand and pat you on the back every time we see you, because you're the hardest working woman in civil rights. And it's important to understand that environment and climate justice is in fact civil rights work. I was reminded of that quite frankly, with a PowerPoint you sent me this morning. It's interesting for those who are part of this class. I think it's often that we talk about intersectionality in the NAACP. We talk about the fact that what we do has branches and roots in many other issues across the board. And Jackie sent me something this morning where we're looking at the issue of education, school reopenings post, well, not really post, but as part of COVID. And what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of emergency management. Right now, I think we have traditionally in the NAACP thought about emergency management as being something that applied to hurricanes and earthquakes. And that was pretty much kind of where we saw our role as helping people to come back from those kinds of disasters. Little did we know that we were going to be struck by COVID, and that as we looked at environment and climate justice, there was going to be a question of how do you reopen schools in the midst of, yes, a disease-related pandemic, but in the middle of hurricane season. Quite frankly, in the very probably most active part of hurricane season. And what does that mean for our leadership on the ground? So I'm really pleased that so many of you have signed up to participate in this program. I know it's a 3-day program. I know that you're giving up a lot for the next 3 days, your evenings for the next 3 days. But we appreciate the fact that you are committed to that. Let me particularly, obviously, thank my Florida family for being the host for this initial training. Y'all are my people. You will always be my people. So it's good to have you as the base for this. But let me also welcome to this class anyone who is from outside the state of Florida. I saw Teresa Haley's name pop up, president of the Illinois State Conference. And she's a proud activist of the year, first Adult Activist of the Year award presented to Teresa on our recent Image Awards program. It's good to have everybody here on this webinar. It's good to have all of you in place, being able to take advantage of the lessons that you will learn, the certification that you will receive, and the information that is necessary for you to deal with the problems that inevitably will face either your community or your neighbors. It's important for all of us to be aware of those things. In this period of, I don't know, I guess we're under a dual pandemic right now. We have to deal with COVID-19, but we also have to deal with systemic racism, particularly as it impacts our law enforcement agencies. There is so much that is going on. And it's important for us as units of the NAACP to be properly prepared to deal with these issues on the ground. And I'm so happy that in the area of ECJ, in the area of disaster, we have the best possible support in terms of our ECJ program from the national level. And it's our goal to prepare each of you with all of the knowledge that they bring to this class, to this process, so that you can, in fact, go out and protect your communities. Thank you all for participating. I'm glad you're here, and have a great 3 days. I'll probably be back with you maybe on Wednesday evening. Hopefully, I'll be able to drag the president along with me at that point. But know that we're here and we're extremely supportive of our ECJ program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Russell. You are always here and supporting with such great affirmations. We appreciate your leadership always. And we wish you well with your meeting. And thank you again for joining us. We'll see you on Wednesday.
All right.
We'll keep you posted as we go along.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Did President Nweze come on the line?
We did make it on, yes. President Nweze, can you unmute and talk to us? *6.
Hello, President Nweze.
Let's see if I can find her on a list. If I can recognize her.
305. She's there. I don't see it. I don't think it's muted.
You don't think it's muted?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Hold on.
I just wanted to say hello to my president
Oh, I see her. Yeah, allowed to
and
talk.
have her respond
Yes.
accordingly.
Oh, there she is.
There we go.
Madam President, hello.
Yes.
And welcome to
Hello,
Florida.
Mr. Chairman. Sir?
I said welcome to Florida as I get ready to leave the program.
Oh, are you leaving? I heard a part of your speech. I didn't hear all of it. Would you please repeat it for me?
Unfortunately, Madam President, nobody else but you wants to hear it. And secondly, I have a finance committee meeting in a few minutes. So
Yes, sir.
you all have a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So, President Swayze, we are eagerly awaiting your remarks. Thank you. You're welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Jackie. I tell you, you all have no idea who we have with us tonight in terms of soon to be, well, she already is, Dr. Jacqueline Patterson. And she has just been so outstanding. She's one of the 100 women throughout the world who are experts in this field of the ECJ. And we are so proud of her, and that she would make sure that she comes to work with all of us in the United States. We are just happy that the other countries haven't pulled her over with them yet. So, Jackie, thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you.
And to all of the other staff who have helped and certainly are right here with us, and we are so happy to have them. And to my colleagues, if there's anybody more other than Teresa, hi. Glad you really made it. As a matter of fact, you beat most of us on. And so we are so happy to have you in Florida. And to my Florida family, thank you so much. I am so happy for each of you who have come. We know Jackie is well aware. She tells the story every time she gets an opportunity about the fact that there are over 100 people who have tried to come, and they certainly want to get here by registering so quickly, but they will be coming at some time, I'm certain, and will join a training. I'm looking forward to the 3 days. I certainly want you to know that any questions you have, we'll certainly be happy to answer them. Thank you again, Dr. Jackie Patterson. I present you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we really appreciate President Swayze's leadership as always, because without her, we wouldn't have 290 people that expressed their
Oh my goodness.
That's the type of inspiration she provides to the great state of Florida. And so it really has been a pleasure to continue to work with you and all your passion and drive and humor.
Well, thank you. I really, if you would be kind enough, Jackie, may I have one more second?
Oh, sure.
I don't want to forget, there are two people I did not mention, and I want to do that. First is the chair, Kathy Eglin. I hope Kathy is on. This is Kathy's other home as well as yours, Jackie. So we're so happy to have her if she's on. And I know she's been on, so I certainly want to make sure that she knows that we love her and would appreciate any time she can work with us in Florida and visit with us. And the other person, I want you to know who's really been coordinating this project for the Florida State Conference, none other than Tori Austin. He has been the one who has been shepherding it to ensure that everything went like it should be. And Tori, I want you to know that you're loved and appreciated by not only me, but all of your Florida family. And we look forward as we move into the next days for your support. Thank you very much again, Dr. Jackie Patterson.
Thank you so much, President Swayze. I appreciate you as always.
You know you can't tell me nothing because I tell everybody.
Okay.
So
Hmm. Wow. I think Kathy's on as well, so let me see if I can unmute her. Kathy, is that you? Maybe not. Okay. Um, all right. Oh, Kathy, is that you? No? Okay.
We were on a meeting together earlier, so she might be in another one by now.
Okay. Yeah, she's been kind of crying for the call-in information, and I sent it to her, but maybe she's still trying to make it. We'll see. Okay. Okay, good. So
I'm gonna jump off and see if I can track it down. Okay.
okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So without further ado, we are going to I'll just do a quick overview of the course, and then we will of the whole certification program, and then we'll get right into the agenda for the training for today. So just to remind everyone what you've signed up for, let me do a quick share screen and show you. This will go smoothly. Let's see, show all windows. Okay, there we are. Share. Okay, so make this bigger. All right. Okay. So our aim is to really go big with this in terms of making sure that all of the units are accessing this. So we have, by the end of 2020, we want to make sure that every state in the nation will have at least 2 representatives certified through this program. And that way we can have the option for a trainer model with that. And then by the end of 2020, we want to make sure every branch in the nation actually at least knows about the opportunity to have a representative join one of these trainings and cohorts. And by the end of 2020, we want to have at least 500 branches who have had representatives certified. And so we'll see how many branches are represented on this call, but with all the folks that you all have signed up, we're off to a good start. And so, as you know, the target folks for the training and for the certification program are the NAACP state and area conference leadership, as well as branches, chapters, youth councils, next gen, basically all of the NAACP. And we have three tiers of success, or 3 tiers of the program. One is the disaster equity apprentice, meaning you're just kind of getting your feet wet. 2 is disaster equity practitioner. You've already gotten your feet wet with the basic training, and now you're ready to do some actions. And then number 3 is disaster equity guardian, where you've really gotten some good foundational work going on, and then you really want to move into actually making change in your community. And once you've done those things, then you will be a disaster equity guardian. And so at the end of this course, if everyone stays the course every day for the full 9 hours, which we'll be tracking because we need to really maintain the integrity of this program, which is why we were so rigid about making sure that we got the certificates in, because we can't really have you go and share this with folks and then they come to find out, oh, well, it's not as rigorously monitored, or so it doesn't really have the level of standardization that we're looking for. So we're really being rigid about tracking participation. So we have a number of quizzes and so forth throughout to make sure that you're meeting the learning objectives that we're intending, but we're all here to support you to be successful. So, so the first acknowledgement will be at the end of these 9 hours. If everyone's successful by the end of Wednesday night, you'll receive a disaster equity apprentice certificate that will be signed by our president and CEO and our chairman and our emergency management task force committee chair, task force chair. Yeah. And then and also our ECJ committee chair. So it'll be a lot of signatures at the bottom. And then at the end of the disaster equity practitioner, you'll also get another certificate, but then you'll also get a vest and a little badge. So you have some credentials when you're out there doing the work. And then once you finish the disaster equity guardian certificate, then you'll get like a swag bag, and it'll have a bunch of different stuff in there. So look forward to that. But otherwise, today we've already done, we have kind of an optional Zoom tutorial for those who weren't familiar with Zoom, because this is going to be, you're going to have to be taking these different quizzes and so forth. So you have to be able to be pretty proficient with Zoom to go through this and get credit for everything, because even the pop quizzes we're going to do, there's credit assigned to it. So then we have the 2 courses that you all know only too well at this point. And then we're already behind schedule, but we're gonna hopefully, I don't know, yeah. But anyway, so we're gonna quickly go through this. And so this is my part, well, not that behind, we're 7 minutes behind, so I'll go fast. So first we're gonna have our great partners from Healthcare Ready, Kanaya Hardy, who you might already see, and she'll be giving us an overview of the types of disasters out there. As you see, as Chairman Russell was saying, there's all these types of disasters that people don't really necessarily think of, pandemics being one of them. And so I want to make sure that you're really aware of what all these types of disasters are. And again, because it's standardized across the country, we'll be introducing you to blizzards, even though you'll hopefully never see one. But just so you know what all of these are. And again, so we have standardization. So every time we do this, we're sharing the same information with folks. Next, we'll go through the emergency management phases. So what are the various phases of emergency management? And again, Kanaya will be doing that with us. And then we'll have a review of emergency management policies and governance. And we have with us Tanya Gulliver Garcia from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, who's really going to be teaching us about the various policies, everything from preparedness policies, like National Flood Insurance Program, through to, I was working recently with the folks in Tennessee and giving them a package of information about ordinances that they can pass to prevent gentrification and displacement after disasters, and even policies around, well anyway, and even policies around local flood, local stormwater management, and which I know the folks in Ocala know all too well about. So just kind of teaching us what kind of policies what's the policy and governance landscape, so that later on when we start to think about the changes we want to see, then we'll know what the foundation we're on is. And she'll also talk to us a little bit about what some of the federal agencies are and what the programs are that they have operating. So then Marcus Coleman from HWC will be doing a review of some of the private sector organizations, the VOAG, the Red Cross, the relationship between Red Cross and FEMA, Salvation Army, National Baptist Convention, etc. And then, so that'll be day 1. I think I'm not going to go through day 2 and so forth, just because we want to kind of try to get back on time. So if anyone, I see that there's 3 hands raised, and because we're a little bit short on time, wondering if people can put that in the chat, and as people are talking, I will try to answer the questions in the chat. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Kanaya Hardy from Healthcare Ready. Thank you. And I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. And we hope we can cover some topics today, just some overview information about disaster types and the kind of things you can expect, and really primarily how we classify these things and how we look at it in emergency management, just to give you that introductory information. And nothing is really probably a crazy surprise because you've seen these disasters, you've heard of these things. These aren't crazy terms, but just like it's some insights into how emergency management industry classifies and groups these things together. And so I wonder, should I take over screen sharing, or is that?
Yeah, Jackie, I was trying to do the screen sharing, but it says it's disabled.
Okay, is that the same thing for you, Kanaya? You can't do it?
Yeah, looks like I'm not able to do it either.
All right, let me see. Make host, forbid record. Okay, hold on. Remove, stop chat. Interesting. Okay, trying to figure out how do we, I thought as a panelist, then automatically you'd be able to do that, but no. Okay, so let me let me see what the settings are that might be preventing that. Hold on. And enable practice section, webinar options. Okay, well, okay, so let me just add you as a host and see if that helps. They say change the host. Can there only be one host? No, they can be more.
No, there should be an ability to make someone a co-host.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But when I tried to make her a host, it said, do you want to change the host?
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah. It's not what we want to do. All right, let me go back to the settings.
I think in the Zoom settings, you can turn on and off the co-host capability. So it might be turned off, possibly.
Yeah, let me go to panelists, edit. Sorry everyone. Just a little challenge. Okay, let's go back. All right, well, let's just, okay, here we go. Do you see, are you able to do it now? Okay, great.
And my mute on.
What'd you say?
Are you able to see my screen now, the presentation?
Perfectly.
Okay, awesome, awesome. I realized I had myself on mute for a second there. So again, we're here to help just explain some concepts of the basics of emergency management and disaster resilience. So welcome and thank you guys all for joining. So I'll be leading from the Healthcare Ready perspective and just a brief overview of Healthcare Ready. So we are a nonprofit organization that responds to disasters across the country. And we broadly support the healthcare supply chain and the healthcare system and preparing the system for disasters. So we say that we support the healthcare system's resilience against disasters. So not just responding to crisis, but also creating trainings, information, and educational resources to help the system prepare itself. And so broadly, this includes a lot of different activities, but one of the things in my portfolio particularly is trainings and exercises. So it's really great to be here doing trainings because we don't just train healthcare systems and healthcare facilities, but we also do community-based trainings and trainings for organizations that aren't in the traditional emergency management space, but need to be just as prepared and just as knowledgeable about these things as well. And I guess, Marcus, you can introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. My name is Marcus Coleman. So I work for a private sector company called HWC. Prior to that, spent about a decade or so at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And a lot of my work and expertise originally started in the Preparedness Division at FEMA, and then went on to the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and have had the honor to work alongside the NAACP both in my prior life at FEMA and in a support pro bono volunteer support capacity in this current context. And so we're looking forward to joining Kanaya to kind of talk through some of the content tonight, and generally to be available for the next 3 days if you have any additional questions that pop up as well.
Awesome, same here. Standing by for questions or as additional resource and additional support system as we are responding to COVID actively within our organization. So here are a few, I know some pieces that Marcus wanted to flag as really pivotal resources, including, of course, the NAACP and the Eye of the Storm toolkit. And we also just flagged here the partner playbook. And it's basically kind of an overview of Healthcare Ready, the work we do and how we partner with organizations. But I won't bore you with the nitty-gritty details of these resources, but definitely direct you to them unless Marcus has any other additional insights to add here.
Yeah, no, just to reinforce our point, a lot of the concepts and stuff is covered a lot more in depth. I'd say that I Am the Store Toolkit is definitely, for those of you that have gone through it already, a very in-depth resource. So the resource from FEMA and from Healthcare Ready kind of complement a little bit of what's already in there. So if you just need something to go back to, I just wanted to flag these for you.
Awesome. And so one of the things that's really critical to understanding disasters overall, and this is just a brief overview before we get into disaster types, is really understanding why it's so important and essentially the factors that play into disaster resilience and what we mean. So essentially, community resilience is basically the ability to bounce back in disasters. And we think about it as a rubber band. So basically how stretchy that rubber band is before it breaks. So making a community more resilient just makes it strengthening that rubber band. And these are some of the factors that we look at, especially when it comes to public health emergencies. So we have COVID, of course, being a public health emergency. Obviously, it's a disease that's spreading, so that's kind of more logical and easy to understand. But one of the things that's really critical to understand is that even if a disaster isn't necessarily very directly health focused, it often has public health implications. And so often a public health emergency will be declared for hurricanes, for tornadoes. So public health emergencies are not just explicitly diseases and disease outbreaks, but it can also be any form of disaster that is so catastrophic that it impacts the healthcare system. And so of course, having trust built in a community, having really resilient infrastructure and all of these different facets make it so that people can recover and protect themselves, their safety, their lives, their well-being in the time of a disaster. So this brings us to the overview of types of disasters. And so the three categories that we look at, and it changes depending on the organization and the time and basically the classification, but these are an easy enough set of categories to break down the different types of disasters that exist. We have natural hazards, and essentially, these are the weather events, the storms, the earthquakes, tornadoes, blizzards, and I won't bore you with an explanation of what each disaster type is, but rather a categorization of natural disasters as ecological weather events that happen. And it just so happens that the way our infrastructure is set up, these can cause severe impacts to people's lifestyles and cause basically breakages in the infrastructure system. And so this can include road closures. This can include facility damage, power outages. We all know what it's like when power goes out and there are so many cascading impacts that happen, not just in your own home, but in the healthcare system. And so, for example, one of the things that we coordinate very often during major power outages is generators and generator fuel. So it's something that it's really critical to healthcare facilities having a very strong and resilient system of power support, so that in a time of a disaster, when power goes out, when flooding is rampant, and so transportation is kind of very touch and go, it's important to have these systems set up. So natural hazards, we see a lot of the road closures, and some of the really critical impacts when we think about road closures is the large topic of access and reentry. Because when we have evacuation orders and curfews, basically there's times in which people are not really supposed to be on the roads. And this is something that we're seeing as well in COVID because of stay-at-home orders, that those that are needed to make medical deliveries have to navigate that system and navigate the world in which there are road closures and there are damaged roads and roads that are not passable, and how basically to get the supplies to healthcare facilities, get supplies to shelters, be it a hurricane shelter or a tornado shelter, and how to navigate those infrastructure challenges. And especially during a natural disaster, we think about infrastructure in a very broad and basic way as literally the building blocks of the community. So we're thinking about roads, we're thinking about power, we're thinking about water systems, and those kinds of impacts. Technological hazards are obviously very relevant right now in the 21st century world where we are so incredibly reliant on technology. And it's not just necessarily the most basic things of just basically a power outage. This is also encompassing cyber attacks. And so when we have large scale attacks on the power system or attacks on computer systems or phishing and the kind of phishing scams and different cyber attack more intellectual cyber crimes. This can have broad ranges of impacts when we look at government infrastructure, when we look at healthcare infrastructure. So of course, the average person can be impacted by a cyber attack and cyber crime. But when we look at it in a broad way of the data sharing and data stealing in the healthcare system, this can have a broad range of impacts on those that rely on that system. So it's not a disaster in the most obvious way, but it has cascading impacts on people that rely on infrastructure systems. And then that brings us to the human caused disasters. We often refer to these as man-made disasters. And this is something that we're all very familiar with in the modern age as well when it comes to terrorist attacks, and this includes domestic and foreign terrorism. So thinking about mass shooting incidents as being a very, unfortunately, a growing concern area in the world of emergency management. So it's really critical that we look at those as disasters as well. So not just the weather systems and not just cyber attacks, but the times when people either intentionally or unintentionally cause issues that can bring widespread crisis as well. And so just to provide a little bit more information about natural hazards, essentially the best way to think about a natural hazard is not that it necessarily in and of itself is a crisis against, lifestyle and well-being, but that the way our systems are set up and how resilient and how well built they are determines whether or not we're able to bounce back. So for example, there are many tropical storms and cyclones that happen out in the ocean that no one cares about, but when we bring it closer to the coastal areas, when you bring it onto land, that's when we're thinking about it. So throughout a year, throughout a hurricane season that we're actually in the midst of right now, there are many storms that may be named, they may become storms, and may be catastrophic events, but they're maybe catastrophic level winds, but since they don't hit land, they don't necessarily matter. So really in the world of weather management and understanding these kinds of impacts, we're looking at how likely they are to happen in the impact zones, not necessarily just what's happening out there in the broad across the globe. And so that's really important to think about when we think about community resilience, because it helps you to understand the concept that it's really about building a community that's stronger and stronger against a natural disaster, because the more we create planning and the more we create systems that can avoid having people in the most disaster-prone regions, the more resilient we can be against disasters.
Yeah. If I could also add, Kanaya, when we talk about natural hazards, and I know that many people on the call are connected in looking through this, like through the environmental and climate justice context. So when we talk about some of these natural hazards, there's a few broader categories. So like we can talk about some of the low notice. So there's maybe not a lot of time. So here you want to think about like your tsunami, for example, or something where there's not a lot of time to act on it. There's the no notice. And so no notice is like earthquakes. You see the volcano that's there. Those are some of the low notice disasters. And then for Florida, right, you have some of those disasters that you occur every year and you have at least maybe a few days to kind of at least start to react to it. So here you think about some of the hurricanes, some of the severe weather patterns, and each one of these natural hazards, right, affords opportunities to look at different impacts in different ways. And so, I think one of the key things that we also want to add here is that when you talk about the different types of natural hazards, there's a place on ready.gov/be-informed that actually walks you through step by step what different steps you can take to be prepared for each type of hazard, and what are some of the preparedness actions individually and community-wide that can be helpful for those low notice incidents, again, those no notice incidents, and some of those incidents that have a bit more time. On the other side of the national hazard spectrum is we think about the duration for the response. And so for anybody who's been through a tornado or a severe weather storm, like you may have impacts for the actual response to the thing, the tornado being on the ground maybe for all of 5 or 10 minutes. There are other natural hazards that actually go over long durations of time, like drought, that very much fall in some of the climate related impacts that we're seeing play out. And so when we think about natural hazards, I think people typically want to see it associated with one type of disaster. So a blizzard, for example, may last only but a few hours, but it may snow for a few days afterwards. But the important thing to know about natural hazards is that you definitely have different durations of time, depending on what the type of hazard is. That's all I want to add.
Exactly. Thank you. No, those are really important points. especially thinking about that notice versus no notice event. And so how emergency management does have to be very broad and be able to kind of adjust for the situation depending on whether or not you're ramping up for a disaster that's expected, or whether or not you're just jumping in and responding to something. And speaking of the no notice events, oftentimes we see that technological and man-made disasters are pretty broadly no notice events. And that probably makes sense to most people because if you're thinking about a mass shooting incident, or you're thinking about a fire or an arson event, those are situations where there is a notice. You're not going to get an advance warning. So the systems that are built in place to protect against these disasters have to respond immediately. And so that really requires that there's very strong partnerships in the community so that those that are most impacted by these events are connected with the systems that are expected to support them. And so that actually brings us to the emergency management phases. And so Marcus made a great point about the duration of events and the fact that each event, whether or not there's a notice about it, whether or not there's advance warning, that doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not the event itself lasts for a duration that is, correlated with the notice. So this is an entirely different kind of characteristic to think about when we think about disasters, is how long it's lasting. And different phases kind of help us think about those things. So the first graphic we have here is basically, this is the recovery continuum, which basically means that the point of this is to show you how at any given time, when it comes to a catastrophic event, we're in some sort of phase of either preparing for, responding to, or recovering from that event. And this is especially critical when we think about really widespread damage and widespread economic and social issues. So it's not just necessarily the power outage or the flooding, but we see in a disaster like COVID, where we have people who've lost jobs, people who have very strained health systems, very strained health situations because of the strains of the healthcare system. And so we'll be in a recovery phase for long after COVID goes away, and it's not really going away anytime soon. So right now, we're in the intermediate, in that amber level peak we see here, but there will be long-term recovery for years. And we see this across the board, of course, when you think back to Hurricane Katrina, for example, and Healthcare Ready was founded in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So sometimes we use that as like that flagship event that really showed the healthcare system especially, but it also really highlighted some of those inequities and how those inequities often leave our communities worse off and with a much longer recovery period. So really the point to really take away from this is that the immediate response, when there's responders on the ground, when the news is talking about a disaster 24/7, those are critical periods of time to be focused on an event. But there is ample opportunity after that to really support a community because it doesn't go away immediately. And in the preparedness phase, in this graphic you'll see is a little bit, the choppy graphic there is supposed to basically just indicate how preparedness is an ongoing effort in a community to make sure that they're prepared for the next disaster, because we can't anticipate them all. I don't know if Marcus had anything to add on that one. Otherwise, I'll go ahead.
No, you covered that pretty well.
Okay. And then another thing to think about when we think about disaster planning in the life cycle is not just the infrastructure in the system and how well the community bounces back, but really the mental health impacts. And this is not necessarily just about mental health, and when I say not necessarily about mental health, I mean, it's not necessarily about behavioral health incidents or mental health issues, but just the overall well-being and the perspective of a community. Because you may seem as an individual to have a very resilient mental health state, but as a community, there are peaks and there are valleys to that recovery from a disaster. And so this just breaks through, goes through some of those peaks and valleys, and really speaks to the fact that immediately after a disaster, we have this heroic and the honeymoon phase where there may be a high where a lot of people are stepping up. A lot of people are stepping up to the community, a lot of coalitions and partnerships are being created, and this is all awesome. But then when the next disaster comes around, those efforts may have fallen to the wayside because throughout the months and years it takes to really truly recover, there are periods of disillusionment, there are periods where people feel more disconnected from that recovery and more disconnected from the ability to bounce back and build back something greater and something more resilient. And so to get right into the actual phases of emergency management, this really helps you to understand the emergency management life cycle. And we think about it as a cycle, not necessarily just a 1 through 5 phase, because we're always in some phase with any disaster. And prevention speaks very directly about terrorists and the man-made events. And this is something that emergency management agencies do a lot of work to search for signs of and incidents where a domestic or foreign or terrorist event is possible, to prevent those things from happening. So setting up security systems, be it physical or personnel based, this is the way that prevention looks like in a day-to-day basis. I don't know.
So when we talk about prevention in the NAACP context and just the broader community context, what we're also talking about is acts of domestic terrorism. We think about arson against churches or other facilities. So those are the type of things when we're thinking about the prevention part of the cycle. But at a community level, a little bit of it is, right? You may know that you have threats, and maybe some of you have taken bomb threats before. You've had certain things happen. So having those processes and protocols in place allow you to do that. The other piece that I want to call out here is each one of the things that are listed is in emergency management, what people would consider kind of the functions of that particular mission area. And so in some of the information that we provided, it kind of gives you an in-depth definition for what it means to have, operational coordination. But basically what that's looking like is if your particular branch or your state conference is supporting a community where there's been an uptick in either arsons or perceived bomb threats, it's just about having those processes and protocols in place. Like that's what we mean when we're talking about prevention as a part of the disaster context.
Exactly. Thank you. And then that brings us into protection. And we think about protection. Another way to look at this is, again, the terminology kind of changes depending on the sector. And we talk a lot about the public sector versus the private sector, government agencies versus, in our case, the healthcare facilities, because everyone speaks a different language in emergency management. And emergency managers on the private sector side tend to think more in terms of business continuity. But one of the ways we look at protection is preparedness. But essentially, this is building off of the prevention and kind of phasing in to really truly making systems stronger, and making sure that there are protection systems in place. And so this includes, for example, number 8, cybersecurity. And so there are a plethora of cybersecurity programs, agencies, and organizations that are in place to not only just track and prevent cyber threats, but also really respond and understand what really the systems that need to be in place to protect infrastructure systems against cyber threats.
And an example of protection in the context of our audience, right? We're also talking about election security. So when you have things that can impede the ability to vote, when you have things that can impede the ability to be heard, like that's kind of where this protection falls under. I'll say the other side of that when we talk about physical protection measures. And so we know that disproportionately, right? Like people of color are in close proximity to some horrible sites, Superfund sites. We have different nuclear power plants, things, and technically part of the role of kind of making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do in absence of just not having those things is making sure that they're taking certain levels of protection, that if something happens in their community and there's a power grid, that there's not disproportionate impacts or another disaster caused because a particular facility or site didn't have those protocols in place. And so a lot of the conversations for what different facilities and organizations are going to do to protect from other hazards from happening fall under this particular mission area or this phase of disaster.
Exactly. And those are really great examples. Phasing into mitigation. So mitigation is a really key disaster management term because it oftentimes outside of the context of disaster management may come across as a similar word to preparedness, protection, prevention. But what mitigation does differently is essentially it's expecting the event to happen and adjusting the system so that the impacts of a disaster event are less severe. So, and we think about in terms of flood planning, this means that not only do we move people away from flood prone areas, but if we are in a flood prone region and we have people already living and having, a life setup in a floodplain. It's about how do we create new ecological systems, and whether it be different types of pavement or different types of garden styles and community gardens that can absorb floodwaters and reduce the impact of a flood in an area where that's likely to happen. And it's not an option of whether or not it happens. It's really about when it does happen, how do we have a system in place to reduce the impact as much as possible. So this really is a community planning concern, and really important when we think about equity, because we have people we know in our communities are more likely to live in disaster-prone regions and more likely to be at the greatest risk for these kinds of impacts that are based on essentially where you live.
Yeah, and one of the things I think about for the NAACP is I know the NAACP had worked alongside Climate Central and NOAA to do various workshops on vulnerability and making sure that people understood their risk as related to sea level rise, and kind of thinking through those types of workshops. So like those workshops and that kind of work very much falls into what this mitigation bucket would be. And what you'll also notice for the next 3 phases, some of the similarities in terms of just training opportunities and opportunities to kind of get together with folks to look at the same data, get a sense of what kind of questions people are asking, having the opportunity to ask questions, right? Like what's the plan for if this particular community is flooded versus this particular community. But if you're looking for an example from a mitigation perspective, I'd highly suggest, and I know that the workshops I think are still online, a little bit of what was done with Climate Central is a great example of some mitigation activities where the NAACP has been a leader in this space.
Exactly, thank you. And so response is probably the most obvious and most visible part of the emergency management system. And this is where we're jumping in after disaster has struck and responding to the impacts. So this is the immediate coordination, the calls that we set up, the coordination, the information tracking, the risk assessment and impact assessments, and the reporting of those assessments to help stakeholders be engaged in the effort, help them understand what's happened, and how we coordinate across infrastructure systems. So how each system, whether it be water, transportation, communications, how each one has been impacted, and how to best partner across to ensure a cross-sector response, and that all facets of society and life as we know it are able to stand back up as soon as possible. And then responding to those cases in which people have already been hurt, systems have already been damaged, and there is a need for immediate response and immediate recovery, whether it be, medical support or sheltering for people with, damaged homes. So response is probably the most obvious, again, the most visible part of the emergency management system. And this is literally just responding to the crisis once it's happened.
I mean, I would add that when we talk about response, I think that's what people associate with emergency management the most. That's also where you're going to find a lot of the programs that happen immediately after a disaster, where people have questions. So I know one of the trainings you took was about civil rights in the disaster assistance process. Many of those programs are tied to some of the response and recovery efforts. The other thing, so In the Eye of the Storm actually does a great job in breaking down specifically like what each one of these frameworks do. And point you to some activities and materials to help that you can work alongside people, particularly state and local emergency managers that you'll hear a little bit about later afterwards. But the big thing in response is when you're seeing TV and everybody's talking about a lot of things, it's usually related to the response process, because I think that that's where you see a lot of where that coordination on the ground does or doesn't happen. And so I know that for NAACP, in the prior MOU with FEMA, for example, some of the efforts that memorandum of agreement allowed FEMA and NAACP to work on is to coordinate on making sure that we can navigate together some of the civil and human rights challenges that happen during an emergency response period.
Right, exactly. And so then that brings us to recovery. And so recovery being the most drawn out part of the disaster phase to an extent, in the sense that it phases out from response. And so there's no clear cut situation in which it becomes recovery and it's phased out of response. But essentially it's the months and years that it takes to really build a community back up after a catastrophic event. And this can be a community at the neighborhood level all the way up to the national or global level. Recovery is a ongoing process, and it's oftentimes a moving target as cascading events and other catastrophic disasters happen on top of that. And so we're looking, of course, right now, as we started off this call talking about the 2 different pandemics we're dealing with, one being COVID and one being centuries-long pandemic of racism, where we're still recovering from that, we're still responding. And so these recovery periods exacerbate each other and make it so that there are just a lot of cascading and overlapping impacts.
Just a point to add here, and this actually goes for all 5 mission areas. And so while each one of these are defined and kind of led, like where federal government has led for defining each one of these, in terms of the role and opportunities to engage, it very much is what would be called a whole community or all different type of sectors function. So I think when we talk about recovery specifically, you're going to see terms that you're most familiar with and that we always advocate about, and we see playing out now, right? Access to housing, making sure people have proper access to health and social services. And when we talk about that downstream flow of federal resources, some of the non-government resources and some of the philanthropic resources, a good bit of that falls into that recovery bucket as of now. What we know to be true is the preferred way, and I think a lot of what this training is supposed to be getting at over the next 3 days, is to making sure that we have enough of the right people that can also work, particularly in that mitigation phase, to start walking alongside some of the partners that you would engage during that response and recovery phase long before you need to. And so this is a very high touch description of each one of the areas. Just calling back attention again, I think the Eye of the Storm Toolkit does a good job of providing it in the context of the NAACP, but also the partner playbook that Healthcare Ready provides gives some pretty actionable guidance that if your branch or if the state conference does decide that they want to continue to engage with a particular organization, or as you move up from that first level of engagement for the certification to Guardian, they also provide some additional materials to kind of advance your work and interest in this area. But when you think about some of those larger grant programs, when you're talking about some of those larger investments after any storm, most of that is going to be tied to the recovery function and a lot of the recovery work, to Kanaya's point. That's all I got.
Exactly. Thank you. And so that brings us into policies and governance, and I believe Marcus will take over from here.
Yeah, we're actually going to pass it over to our friends at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. And I think, yeah, so I think we'll have her cover this section, and then, and then I'll come back on the back end to talk about some of the whole community partners. So Jackie, do you want us to pass it straight to CDP, or are we going to take
If you could pass host back to me, and then I now know how to make folks co-host. So,
we'll pass the mic to Jackie. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, let me make sure I can do this properly.
thank you.
Are we all good?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Tanya, hold on. All right, actually, panelists. Hold on. And I did a little tutorial while you were talking, so now I feel like I know what I'm doing. More. Change role to attendee. Oh, interesting. Okay, there's not the option to make you a co-host. There's just host. So I'll turn it back to you as in terms of host, and then just hopefully I'll work on that offline. So here you go.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm actually going to start with a video, and hopefully this works. I've never done a screen share video before. Can you hear sound? When it was starting, could you hear music?
I heard something initially, but now nothing.
No, I paused it. I just want to make sure.
Okay, yeah, definitely heard something initially.
Okay.
Oh, but not now. Can you hear it now?
Nothing.
Can't hear it? Okay.
No. Sorry.
Oh, let's try this. We'll do one test, and if it doesn't work, then we will just send you the link. Just give me a thumbs up, Jackie, if you can hear now.
Okay.
Disasters happen in every community, and they come in all shapes and sizes, from a simple incident affecting one community to a major catastrophe affecting an entire region. A hurricane, for example, can cause a massive storm surge and powerful winds, which can lead to flooding, collapsed buildings, fire, loss of power, and other consequences. When these widespread impacts cascade and multiply, we have a catastrophe on our hands. The government will immediately initiate a response to address these challenges. And in the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, the emergency managers will activate plans to understand the scope of the disaster, to ensure that help reaches those in trouble, and to coordinate police officers, firefighters, and medical teams to make communities safe and secure as soon as possible. There are also a number of non-governmental, community, and faith-based agencies and organizations that are active during a disaster and will leap into action and work with the government to provide emergency food, shelter, supplies, and more to those in need. The problem is that there is often little communication between different agencies and organizations serving the same community. And even though they can help one another, they may not be aware of each other's efforts. Without information about the operations of other organizations, they could potentially hurt their local recovery effort by duplicating resources, wasting funding and time, putting field staff in danger, and even directly hindering another organization's work. For example, let's say that we encounter a certain community that's been affected by a disaster, and there are two organizations that have decided to lend a hand and supply much-needed resources. Since they're not communicating with each other, imagine they are both providing home cleanup kits. But neither of them is providing food, which the community needs. With a quick exchange of information, one of the organizations could start providing meals. This way, two of the community's needs will be met. During a disaster, these connections are best made through communication networks coordinated with the local Office of Emergency Management. These networks bring together community organizations and agencies during a response. Since the emergency managers in the EOC have a big picture view of what is happening, they can interact and share information. An example of one of these communication networks is the Local Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, or VOAD. VOAD is a network of non-governmental, community, and faith-based agencies and organizations that specialize in disaster services and convene on a regular basis for information exchange, even when there are no disasters. Although each agency or organization is in charge of its own operation, the members communicate with one another so they can share emergency information and coordinate emergency efforts to provide vital services to those in need. Oftentimes, VOAD has a representative that sits in the EOC with the emergency managers and can help provide critical information on unmet needs and available resources. Some are affiliated with national organizations and should link with them, as these larger agencies will be present during a disaster as well. It is critical to understand that these connections cannot be formed during the chaos that surrounds a catastrophe. We must connect before a disaster strikes and stay connected. Learn how you should connect with your local emergency management office now. From them, you can obtain accurate emergency information and details on how to volunteer. Visit their website and become familiar with the different programs and educational materials that are offered. Sign up for emergency alerts if available. As soon as disaster strikes, check with your local emergency management office to see if it's safe to go into the affected zones, and then determine how you can join the team and help your neighbors. You should also become familiar with the VOAD in your jurisdiction and introduce yourself and your organization or agency so that when disaster strikes, you can be an effective part of that response. To make our communities as safe and secure as possible, we need to bring together all of our resources, connecting our government partners and responders to our professional and voluntary non-governmental agencies active during a disaster, as well as to our neighborhood-based community groups. When we do that, we create an emergency team that has the best experience, the best equipment, and the best local knowledge to deal with any disaster of any shape or size.
So I just wanted to start with that, and I know it overlaps a little bit with what Marcus is going to share later as well, but I think our segments link together quite nicely. And now I'm going to go into the PowerPoint. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, we are an organization that works to encourage philanthropy to be more effective during, before, and after disasters, and to focus funding on recovery. There's a few things that Kanaya and Marcus covered, and so I'm going to skip through those really quickly, but I want to talk about emergency management itself, and then about some of the policies and the ways that you can get involved. So as you can see in the video, emergency management is that overall function, that the managers, the people who are responsible with creating the framework which communities operate in, hopefully to reduce vulnerability to hazards and be able to cope with disasters. And so the vision of emergency management is that the whole community, but especially less vulnerable communities, are safer. And the mission is that they do this by coordinating and integrating activities. I have spent a great deal of time in the EOC, and can tell you that sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't work well. And the more support we have from community on the ground, the better off the whole response is going to be. So it has to be comprehensive. You have to look at all the hazards like Kanaya was talking about, all the phases, all the stakeholders. You have to be progressive. You have to anticipate future disasters. Anyone who's playing with disasters in 2020 knows that there was no anticipating really anything that happened this year. You anticipate one disaster, but not multiple disasters all at the same time. You have to look at risk, and we're going to talk a little bit more about hazard identification in a little bit. Integrated, so again, making sure the community is really involved and all levels of government. If there's not cooperation and coordination and communication between local, state, tribal, and federal levels of government, you're not going to have a successful response. Collaborative, I mentioned, coordinated, flexible. So sometimes the solution that you think is going to be the solution is not what's needed anymore. And you just have to find new and innovative ways to solve a challenge. And then it's really important that emergency managers be professional. And I'm going to share some resources for some diverse emergency management organizations, but I will say that emergency management as a whole tends to be white, tends to be male, tends to be conservative. And it's really important that people who are not white, males, conservatives, get involved in emergency management and really step up so that the profession as a whole can really respond to diverse communities and represent the needs better. So the video talked about the emergency operations plan, and this is something that should be written in cooperation with the community. The community should know about it. You want to have an operations plan or a continuity of operations plan in your own organization, in a workplace, but this is what's going to happen in the whole city, state, region, now with the current 2 pandemics in the country. And everyone needs to know what they're doing and how they work together. There is a structure for that, an incident management command system, but we need to make sure that that's what's happening. In smaller communities, it tends to be everybody does the same thing. And so it's important that the plan lays out who's in charge of what. So I want to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. And I think it overlaps again with what Kanaya said. But all disasters start and end locally. And so that means it's your local level of government that first makes the decision and makes an emergency declaration that there is a disaster happening. They have the ultimate control and the ultimate decision-making powers. That doesn't mean the state or federal government levels aren't going to influence them, but ultimately the decision lies with the local level. When things get too much for a local level, they'll reach out to the state, and the state can then make their own emergency declaration. And then, and the state oversees a lot of that coordination and information flow. And then if it's too much for the state to handle, then they reach out to the federal government. And this is where we get either an emergency or a major disaster declaration. This is where more of the resources, both human resources, product, and financial support come into play. So we know in a disaster that the first people on the scene are going to be neighbors, and they're going to be people who are in the area that's most affected. And then it's going to be first responders and voluntary organizations, faith-based organizations, or groups like the NAACP. And they're the ones that are going to be there in the aftermath. These are our communities. I live in New Orleans, so as you can imagine, we have disasters pretty much every week, it feels like. And the local government can also deploy and control the resources regardless of the source. So if the state says that they're going to send resources into a locality, the locality then gets to control that resource and decide where it goes and what it does. And so they need to, when they make their plans, coordinate and develop their plans within the support and within conjunction of state and federal government. I just want to throw in this little bit of information about tribal governments because they are a unique and in some ways separate part of U.S. emergency management. In a lot of reservations and a lot of rural and isolated areas, tribal nations are the only government presence. And so they are granted a standing that's somewhere in between a locality and a state. And a lot of that depends on the tribe, whether they're federally recognized, where their location is, what kind of region they're located in. But the tribe has the same ability as a local government to request to the state for a declaration, or to actually skip the state and request to the federal government for a declaration. So right now with COVID, you can look and see that there's 50 states that have a declaration, X number of territories, and then a couple of tribes that have their own declaration that's separate from their state declaration where they're located. So as I said, if the state doesn't have the local doesn't have the resources, they're going to go to the state. In a big disaster, the state government may have many local jurisdictions requesting aid at the same time. And so they need to figure out how they're going to allocate the aid and support that they have. And often that means coordinating calls with all of the local cities, counties, regions. And then they also serve as the agent for the local jurisdiction. So this local municipalities can't go to the federal government and ask for a declaration. They can't go and ask for FEMA to come in. They can't go and ask for a pod to be set up. They have to go through their state government. So you're always working in cooperation and coordination. And the federal government's going to step up when states and local governments together cannot respond to the disaster. And so you'll see that as the disaster gets bigger. And most of that work is done through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they have a national federal response plan that the states work with to access the programs and support. So I've talked about the declarations, but just to make it clear, the first stage is a state of emergency, and it goes local, state, federal. You can declare this before a disaster happens, and you'll see people doing that. Tropical Storm Cristobal just came through, and a lot of states put that declaration into place before, and a lot of cities put that into place before it came through, because that allows you to spend money. It allows you to move resources that you wouldn't normally be able to move. Once a local government has done it, they can request it of the state can then request it of the federal. If you can predict that it's going to be a certain level of disaster, or once the certain level of disaster has happened, the federal government can declare a major disaster declaration. But there's a certain threshold needing to be anticipated before a major disaster declaration will get declared, or before it will authorize assistance. So in the Dallas tornadoes that happened, I want to say last year, but time has no real concept for me anymore. They hit in an area that was really wealthy. And so most of the people had home insurance. And in Dallas tornadoes, they needed to have 800 homeowners without insurance before they would qualify for individual assistance. So because so many people had home insurance, they didn't qualify and they didn't get a major disaster declaration. And then finally, there's also fire management assistance grants, which are used primarily in wildfires. There's all sorts of other kinds of declarations as well, and I just put a couple in here. So an oil discharge could be a spill of national significance. Health and Human Services can declare a public health emergency, and that's what we've seen with COVID at the local, state, and federal levels. Secretary of Agriculture can declare disasters when there's a pest or a weed that can threaten livestock or plants in the US. And so some of this I know links over with what Kanaya talked about, but I want to just highlight this concept of a whole community. So the National Preparedness Goal says that the whole community needs to be prepared and needs to be help getting everyone prepared so that we're more resilient, we can respond to, we can recover from. We find sometimes that the whole government doesn't even coordinate, let alone the whole community. And so it's really important for you as community members, especially now that you've had some training, to really stand up for yourselves, to stand up for your neighbors, and to insert yourself into the process wherever possible so that the whole community is involved. And Kanaya talked about these mission areas. I just want to say that underneath these mission areas are what they call the core capabilities. And this is a lot of, in some ways, structure and, siloing. But the goal, as much as possible, is if we know who's doing what, then we can reduce duplication. We can reduce excess spending in areas where we don't need it and focus on the things that we do best, the stay in your lane mentality. So just here's the list. I guess I got out of order, sorry. The whole community is individuals, families, business, faith communities, nonprofits, schools, media, every level of government. Within the national preparedness system, you want to do several different things. It's an organized process for the whole community to move forward. But I want to draw your attention to the first one, which is identify and assessing risk. And Kanaya talked a lot about the hazard assessments that you have to do. This work is supposed to be done with the community. The community is supposed to be part of identifying the risk, hazards, and helping the government figure out what capabilities exist already in the community. Are there individuals? Are there groups? Are there faith-based organizations? Are there businesses that already have the resources to take part in this, who can help share information so that it's not just the government that's doing it? And that results in this threat hazard identification and risk assessment plan, which is supposed to be done every 3 years, and it's supposed to be done with the whole community. So it's asking, what do we need to prepare for? Kanaya showed that whole list of potential hazards. So what ones are likely in your area, in your community? Which ones do you need to be most prepared for? What's your second level of preparedness? What happens if they happen at the same time? What level of response do we need to have? Is this, maybe it's not that likely that we're gonna have a blizzard, so we just need to have one sander and one snowplow, or maybe we need to have 20 of those, but it's not that likely that we're gonna need to have pumps because we're unlikely to flood. What are our current capabilities? What are the gaps between what we need and what we have now? And how do we address those gaps? So you want to do these three things in this THIRA: identify the threats and concerns, give them context. What are the challenges? How much risk is it going to have? And then create targets of how you're going to develop your capabilities in each community to really figure out how you're going to respond in a much better way. And I know this is a lot of like really technical stuff, and I'm sure Jackie will share the PowerPoint with you. I have links to every place that I have taken this from. It's one of those things I said to her earlier today when we finally got our phones working, that feels like 8 hours of a FEMA course compressed into less than an hour. And so what are the response activities of the local government? So you're going to act as the first provider of emergency services. You're going to activate your EOC. Usually you're going to have an EOC operated or activated at a local level, at a state level, at a federal level. You might have individual EOCs. So in Louisiana, we would activate one at HHS, and we would activate one at National Guard. We would activate one at Department of Child and Family Services. The local government's going to coordinate. They're going to notify the state emergency management agency by submitting what we call SITREPs, situation reports. And they're going to activate all the necessary and local governments that are part of their response. So I volunteer with the American Red Cross. I'm a government and partnerships liaison. So I work with organizations like the NAACP in Louisiana, but I also activate to the state emergency operations center when there's a disaster. So last weekend, week and a half ago, we had the potential of having Tropical Storm Cristobal come into the state. And I know the winds and the rain seemed to hit Florida a little more than it actually hit us. But it meant we were on call for a couple days before the storm. There were local activities, and we were one of these organizations that was activated to take part in response. Like I mentioned before, proclaiming a state of emergency and requesting the state emergency management agency to provide state or federal assistance. I think by the time the storm actually reached us, the majority of the southern states of Louisiana, southern parishes of Louisiana had requested state assistance and had activated their own, integrated their own emergency plan and declaration. So the state's going to just step that up a little bit. They're going to monitor the situation. They're going to review what the local governments are doing. They're going to see if there's requests for assistance. In Louisiana, this is all computerized by something we call web EOC. So that meant this weekend, I didn't even need to leave my couch. I could just log on and see what was happening and who was asking for what assistance from Red Cross. If they need to, they'll activate a state EOC. Because of COVID, most of this is being done virtually without a lot of people in the building. And then they'll determine if they need to call the federal government. They'll issue their own state of emergency declaration, which our governor did. They'll request federal assistance under the Stafford Act. So the federal government, we were lucky, Cristobal wasn't that bad, but they would conduct what we call joint PDAs. Government and emergency operations loves acronyms. So a preliminary damage assessment, and they do this with the state and the local government to see where was the damage, who was damaged, and they're looking at individuals, farms, businesses, public agencies, infrastructure, nonprofits. Is there a special arts and culture district or some kind of district, biomedical? And then they will decide if they're going to issue federal assistance. If they are, there will be a federal coordinating officer. They will set up a disaster field office. We have a disaster field office from Katrina still activated in Baton Rouge with hundreds of people in it. And we are coming up on our 15-year anniversary since Katrina. So when Kanaya mentioned that recovery could be ongoing for a length of time, 15 years, we're still there responding. And they will work with their equivalent officer at the state to always coordinate because everything's always sort of flowing down. They're going to look at their federal response plan and determine how the resources of the agencies, as well as the American Red Cross, which is, has a congressional charter to respond in a federal disaster, and they'll coordinate those efforts. They'll establish an emergency support team in Washington to monitor, and then they'll identify another acronym, ESF, the emergency support functions. So my my guess is that there's 3 emergency support functions where you're most likely to get involved. And this could depend and vary on your own skills. So the first one is ESF 6, Mass Care, Housing, and Human Services. This is sheltering and feeding, your basic emergency needs that especially roll out before landfall of an event, if it's something like a hurricane, or immediately after, if it's a tornado or an earthquake. This is where Red Cross sits. This is where National VOAD or your local or state VOAD sit. There may be some need in public health and medical services. So there may be some cooperation with groups that are doing mental health, emergency first aid, those kinds of things. But this public health and medical services is mostly hospital and medical facilities. And then ESF 14, long-term community recovery and mitigation. You know, Kanaya mentioned that we're always in a phase, and I like the circle look sometimes for the phases, because we really are going from one to another. And it's always going on. And you might get to mitigation for one disaster and you're in recovery for another, or you might keep going through those disasters because you discover a pocket of unmet need. And then you may layer more disasters on top of that. I would say the other thing the government likes is just setting up a whole bunch of different areas and criterias. But within the ESF structure, they have as well what they call support annexes, and the link is there. I really encourage you to read it if you haven't. The one that I would say is really important for us as community folks is volunteer and donations management. We like to call donations the secondary disaster. If you've ever responded to a disaster or have been involved with a disaster, people like to send stuff, which can be great, but a lot of the stuff that gets sent, by the time it gets there, it would have been way more cost effective to send money. They're sending blankets and sleeping bags to a hot weather climate. I've seen wedding dresses, pillows that are so stained I wouldn't let my cat sleep on them. And it takes a lot of time. After Hurricane Dorian, both Ocracoke Island in North Carolina and Bahamas closed their docks to donations, and they let them sit on the dock because they had no way to get them from one location to another. And they had no guarantee that they could be distributed once they got there, and they had no idea what was in these hundreds of boxes. And so those donations actually just went to waste. And the same thing can happen with volunteers. You want to have a very structured and coordinated way for volunteers to enter the disaster process and exit the disaster process. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about legislation. Again, I kind of want to go quickly over this because I want to get into some real actions that you can do. But I think legislation is important to know because this is where we make our changes. So the Stafford Act is really the big piece that people talk about. And then the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act and the Disaster Recovery Reform Act are really amendments to the Stafford Act. So this is the act that governs how the US responds to disasters. Because of the shortcomings and deficiencies that have been identified, it has been amended, as I mentioned, those 2 big times. And it also talks about, and this is where the requirements for the preparedness plans and the intergovernmental coordination are actually embedded in the Stafford Act. The Sandy Recovery Improvement Act of 2013 came after Superstorm Sandy. I was in New Jersey for 19 weeks responding to that and got to see a lot about how government and volunteer organizations worked and didn't work, and worked a lot with NAACP handing out supplies and meeting with communities and churches, especially in Southern Jersey, who had been really impacted by this. But the Recovery Improvement Act looked at what was happening and what really didn't go well in Sandy, which was our, biggest disaster since Katrina. It revised a lot of the agreements. It authorized FEMA to be able to enter into agreements with owners of multifamily buildings. It made childcare an eligible expense, which is super important, especially for single parents, but also for double income working parents, or parents where they needed to repair the house and needed to have childcare covered. And this is also where tribal governments were given the authorization to go directly to the federal government for their declaration, and also required FEMA to create a national comprehensive strategy for reducing the cost. We had last year 14 billion dollar disasters. So that means 14 disasters that cost over $1 billion. And some of those were several $billion. And that was the same the year before. And the year before that, I want to say, was $16 billion disasters. So disasters are happening more, and they're getting more and more expensive for us to respond to. The Disaster Recovery Reform Act was just passed in 2018, but it's the largest single piece of legislation to impact disaster response and recovery. However, it contains 56 distinct provisions that require FEMA policy or regulation changes. That has not happened yet. And so we're still operating somewhere between these versions of the act. And it's really important that we encourage FEMA and we encourage our congressional representatives to push this policy changes through, because there's some great things in this that will really help community, but not unless they're done and implemented properly. FEMA usually goes out to a full consultation process, so I encourage you to get on the list for FEMA, get their mailing and their updates so that when they go to a consultation, you know, and you have a chance to respond, whether as an individual or as a branch, however you want to do that. So some of the things that are included in this, this new amendment is it lets FEMA personnel become permanent employees after they've been there for 3 years. That sounds so simple, but FEMA has so many vacancies, and part of the vacancies is because they're always on temporary contract, and that's not sustainable for an individual. It alters how FEMA interacts with state and local governments, so it allows more direction to come from the state and local governments, but also allows FEMA to do certain things, so both top down and bottom up. It puts a lot more innovation for housing construction, especially those that are going to be cost effective. And then it changes all sorts of eligibility for grant funding for wildfire, for water resource development projects, building code, and floodplain management. And those are, you know, climate justice issues, stormwater management issues that are really critical. So I mentioned FEMA before. Oh yeah.
Oh, just quickly. I think now is a break time, and since it was a new section, I thought it would be a good time to do it.
Sure.
All right.
That would be great.
All right, so we'll just take a 10-minute break, everyone. I know it's been intense, so 10 minutes, so we'll come back at 7:50. Thank you. Tanya, can you switch host back to me? Great, thanks. All right, got polls here. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm in now. Perfect. I'm glad. Yep. And I figured you probably went on, so I didn't want to interrupt you. So, okay. All right. So I'm on now. So I don't know. I guess they took a roll call or something, I'm assuming. Oh. Right, because they should show, I'm looking at the, okay, I'm looking at the group panel. I'm seeing if they're showing me on. They're not, but I guess they'll pick it up. It's like 84 people on here, so there's a lot of people, yeah.
I think you're showing on the group panel as Sean, because I can see your mic moving.
That's true.
Okay, so, okay, hold on for a sec. Let me hold on. Somebody's talking to me, I think, Brad, because they say I'm showing up as Sean.
It's true.
Okay, is that Jackie?
Yeah, but that was Tanya who told you initially.
Oh, that was Tanya who told me initially. So for some reason, yeah, so for some reason my name is showing up on the screen as Sean. So you know what, Brad? You're probably showing up as Sean also.
Probably. There's several Sean.
There are, yeah, 3 Seans.
Yeah.
4 Seans.
Okay, so let me just ask Jackie, should we give you what our actual names are?
Yeah, do you know how, so if you go to, you're on the computer, right?
Yeah, I'm on my computer.
If you put your cursor over the upper right-hand corner, do you see those 3 blue dots?
I sure do. So I'm gonna rename.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, and let me tell Brad to do the same thing because rename, okay.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so everyone, because the person who created the quiz is stuck somewhere between New Orleans and Gulfport, Mississippi, we need everyone to do the poll because then that will count towards your quiz. So you don't have to take the quiz.
Okay, is there a quiz on here?
Yeah, if you joined after, if you just joined, then you won't see it because it was posted before, like, yeah. And I can't just show it to you, well, for whatever reason. Let me make sure. Yeah, there's no option to just show it to you. So you'll have to, I'll have to get the link and then you'll have to do it through the Google Doc.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'll do another quiz after this one, and you'll be able to catch up and at least do that one. You'll just miss this one.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just on the first session.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie, this does not let us select any of these options on this poll.
So there are people who were able to select options on the poll. So I'm not sure, because I've got 27 already completed already.
Yeah, I'm trying to select answers and it won't let me select any answers.
Okay, well, I'll give you the link. Hopefully Kathy will get to Gulfport and she'll give us the link by 9 o'clock so that you can take the quiz on the Google Doc. Because there's 2 ways to take the quiz. You can either do it through the poll or you can do it through the Google Doc. So you just do it in Google Doc. So I'm not sure who is using Louis Jennings sign in and asking. Okay, so basically, if you, anyone who is using somebody else's sign in order to get your name posted here, you should take your cursor and then move it over the square that represents you on this grid, and then go in the upper right-hand corner and click on those 4 dots. And then there'll be a drop-down menu, and you can go to rename, and you can put your actual name in there.
Hey, Jackie, I just figured out, this is Trevor. I went and I'm signed in by somebody else. I went and put the name in, but I realized why I can't take the quiz, because I'm under a host. The person that I'm signed under is one of the panelists, and the panelists cannot take this exam.
Oh, but are you
There's a message at the bottom of the poll that says hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Okay, let me see. I can, oh no, it's too late to do that. Okay, so I can unhost you actually. Are you signed under Sean Kinsey's as well?
Yes, I am.
All right, let me go and take him off of host and change role to attendee, and then you can do it. I'll take all of his, change role to attendee. He's got like change role to attendee. And change role to attendee. Okay. So hopefully everybody who signed on as Sean can now take the quiz.
I'm gonna try.
Oh wait, let me. Okay, now try it. Sorry, you were still. Yeah. Anyway, try it now.
Jackie, also a question that some people might be just signed in by phone, and so they're not seeing the quiz.
Yeah, I think they know that.
No, it was just a question.
Yes, I think they definitely won't see. Yeah. Oh, I guess Trevor can't talk now because he's now not a panelist. So I get, but hopefully he's okay. All right. Oh. So for, will I be going over the quiz? Good question. I will go over the quiz probably. Yeah, I guess it depends if everybody, since everyone's not going to be doing the quiz. Well, we'll see. We're up to 41 people who have done the quiz, but all right. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming into the chat. Let me see. So Terry and Connie, I did not see how to change my name because only the panelists are showing. Okay. All right. So I think as a attendee, how can you rename yourself as an attendee? All right, let me look that up. I think if you go under participants, if you click on participants and find your name and then put the cursor over your name under participants, then you would have the option to rename yourself.
Jackie, you might have it set so they can only see the panelists.
Pardon?
They might be set so they can't see their own name. They only see the panelists.
I think though, as participants, they'll see their names.
No, they can't always.
Let's see.
And they're all saying they can't see it.
Oh, okay. All right, let me see. Well, one thing is if people make sure that they put their name in the chat. Like if your name is something different than what's showing, if you put it in the chat it's enabled so the chat will save. So I'll know like who's under somebody else's name. if that makes sense. So whoever is showing up as Lewis Jennings, who's not Lewis Jennings, if you could put your actual name in the chat. Okay, yeah, great. So now we'll make that yeah. So we'll work that out. That's a lot.
Just save the chat and you'll have it all. You'll be fine.
No, not really. But yeah, I just said I'd save the chat, but it's still not gonna be fine. But it'll work out. Okay, so Alfred Knowlton is showing up as Bobby Smith Powell. Oh yeah, you can't see. When you write in the chat, it's interesting. Anyway, but anyway, as long as your name is there under Alfred Knowlton, then I'll know that you're there. So that's fine. So yeah, we see. Yeah, I see you. Yeah, basically, if you write your name in the chat, there's no, you don't have to worry that I'm not gonna see it and it's not gonna be recorded. It will be there, so don't worry about that. There's a lot of ones coming up, and we have to get started again. So when you put your name in the chat, like you can see like both the name of the person that you're serving under, and you can see your name, because like it basically says from, for example, from Harold Ford, and then it will say whose name is underneath. Yeah.
Only if they choose all panelists and attendees. If they're just choosing all panelists, only the panelists are seeing it. And
No, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm just saying this person was saying that they were saying that they weren't clear about whether. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. So let's get started again.
All right. I need you to turn over host again.
Yeah, I'm going to make you interestingly enough, hold on, change all to attendee, and then under attendee, make you a co-host. So we have 50 people who did the poll. Let me know if there's anybody who's still trying to do the poll. Just write in the chat if you're still working on the poll, and I'll keep it open. Okay, I'll hold it open for a little bit. Thank you. All right, let's see what's happening with, okay. All right, so let's try to make you a co-host. For some reason, I was able to make, like Trevor, when I went over his name, it gave me an option to make him a co-host. But for you, it's not giving that option. I wonder why. Okay. So let me end the poll. Well, I'll keep the poll open. So if you could just keep the poll open while you're doing your presentation, that would be great, Tanya. And then when you end and I take back over, then I'll end the poll and post a new poll.
Sure.
All right.
Alrighty, folks, we're getting towards the home stretch. So I just want to go over a couple of things from FEMA, then we're going to talk about flood insurance and ways that you can get more involved. Jackie, can you mute yourself? I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Perfect. So FEMA, not that old, created April 1st, a little bit of an April Fool's joke for those of us who are in disaster management, 1979, but bringing together 2 centuries of disaster recovery programming and finance that were really spread out all over the place in government. This, I think, is really important, and this is a good takeaway for you to share with your community. FEMA does not cover the full financial impact of a disaster. It's only supposed to be a top-up to your home insurance or your tenant's insurance. So the max grant, the maximum amount of an individual person could get during Harvey was $33,300. The average that people received during Harvey was $3,000 to $4,000. So that is really important because people expect that they're going to get taken care of by FEMA. And the first thing you hear, as soon as sometimes a disaster hasn't even hit yet, is where's FEMA, where's FEMA? FEMA is in a lot of ways supposed to be a last resort for people who don't have insurance, and it's just a little bit of assistance. It's just a top up. The other thing that is important, and FEMA is doing better on this, is inclusive planning. And that it means that a lot of our disaster preparedness is aimed at people who can evacuate. So make your kit, get your plan, get ready to get out, it's time to evacuate, instead of thinking about what do people need. So for example, with COVID, we've seen a lot of people who no longer have home support workers because they're not allowed to go into a client's home anymore. Or people are going to hospital with disability, they're not able to communicate, and their support worker or their family member isn't allowed to go into hospital with them. So using community members and community resources, FEMA is trying to do this planning that would let them figure out who has portable oxygen, so that we know in a power outage, where are those people that we need to bring extra oxygen to or evacuate them to a space that has a generator. Same with public transportation. In New Orleans, we have evacu spots, and they're publicly identifiable spots across the city that everybody knows where they are, that you can go and wait there if a mandatory evacuation is called, and buses will come there. They won't come to the regular bus stops, they'll just come to the evacu spots. So how does FEMA give out its money? The main way that most people know about is individual assistance. This is that max $33,000 individual assistance, uninsured or underinsured, especially. If you don't qualify for a FEMA grant, you can then apply for a small business loan. It's really important. Another key message to take away is that if FEMA asks you to apply for a small business loan, even if you don't want it, apply. Because if you get turned down for a small business loan, then you might get more grant money on the other end. Individual assistance also includes disaster unemployment, disaster legal services, crisis counseling, disaster case management. All of those things don't get activated, but they have the possibility to get activated when a disaster is declared. The public assistance program, the main ones that we see are emergency work, debris removal, and emergency protective measures. So if you hear that a city or a region has been approved for IA and PA A and B, that's that emergency work. If there's a sufficient level of damage, and again, there's a criteria and it depends on population and geography, you might get approved for some of the other permanent work. So if there was damage to roads or bridges or utilities, parks, buildings, that kind of thing. They also do hazard mitigation grants, and this is important for us because this is a way to get money into our community and make everybody safer. So pre-disaster mitigation, they have flood mitigation assistance, and then they have a hazard mitigation grant program. So this is long-term sustainable action to reduce the risk for people and property from future disasters. What we know is that for at least every $1 put into mitigation, about $4 of future damages are mitigated. Internationally, that's actually even higher. It's around $9. So the National Flood Insurance Program, which I realized as the city was flooding this week, I no longer have. It was just turned 50 years old. And this is a national program to encourage people to buy their own flood insurance. Most homeowner policies will not cover flooding. That was one of the things we saw during Katrina. The reason most people weren't able to rebuild was because they didn't have homeowners or renters or business insurance. If you want to buy it, unless you own a home when it's not get built into your mortgage, it's usually a one-off payment, a one-time per year payment, and it takes 30 days for that to go into effect. So for those of us in the South, hurricane season, something that we really want to buy in April or May and then renew every year. The piece in red that I highlighted is for a community to be eligible for flood insurance, so for individuals in that community to be able to buy it, the community has to adopt and enforce certain floodplain management measures. And so again, a great way for us as community members to get involved when our community or our state is looking at floodplain management ordinances, building codes, zoning provisions. This is where we should be stepping up, because that then gives us access to federal resources at a later date. When Jackie shares this, I really encourage you to take a look at this book, The Joy of Water booklet. It's put out by some organizations in New Orleans, including Imagine Waterworks, who are great folks working on issues of stormwater management and flood prevention. And it has a lot of things that you can do in your own home or your own community to make it safer. So stormwater management is probably, as important as coastal management, but a lot of people don't pay as much attention to it. But this is how we normally flood. And quite honestly, like I said, New Orleans flooded last week. Tropical Storm Cristobal went through, but then on Tuesday or Wednesday, we had a rainstorm and that caused us to flood. So I wanted to give a couple examples. This one is the stormwater governance in Miami-Dade. It was adopted in 2011. The goal is to make roads passable for evacuation and to control flood stages. It has, worked to elevate roads, install new stormwater collection and pumping systems. It's world renowned. So a really good example of constant improvement as well. So they're always testing and adding new activities, new practices and technologies to make sure that the stormwater discharges properly. And then you can see that that falls under some of the federal acts. So again, the federal set the legislation, but it's down to the cities to enact it. Similarly, here in New Orleans, we enacted one a couple of years ago. What I really like about this one, and it's quite possibly in the Miami-Dade one as well, is that it puts requirements in to protect the drainage system during construction and for construction projects. So we are under sea level. All of our water needs to get pumped out. Water doesn't flow out at all. And so when you're building something, you have to control for water, provide catch basins. But once you build something, you also have to create impervious surfaces. You have to have plans for retaining rainwater or detaining it, filtering it, so that the stormwater runoff doesn't lead to flooding in the city. Sorry, my next isn't working. So then I want to talk about anti-displacement, and the difference between gentrification and displacement sometimes gets confused. Gentrification in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can include beautification and improvement of a neighborhood. What it tends to do, however, is increase prices to the point that residents of that community are displaced. And so there's a number of ways to look at anti-displacement. And I'm going to go through a few of these. I'm not going to spend time on them, but don't worry, they're not on the quiz. I just want you to think about these, because these are ways that we as citizens can get involved in our local community to make changes now that are really going to protect us and our neighbors after a disaster. Some of these would be so helpful right now during COVID. So rent controls, just cause eviction controls, a rent board. Some communities will have these in place already, some won't. I worked in homelessness and housing for about 25 years in Canada, and we did a lot of campaigns around affordable housing, second suites, so allowing people to have a basement or a mother-in-law suite, a upstairs unit that was separate over a garage. But we also asked for a lot of developer fees. So if you want to build in our community, you need to also build a proportion of affordable housing, or you need to put in a park, or you need to set land aside for a school, whatever we thought was going to be helpful for that specific community. Community benefit requirements is also really super critical. So a minimum number of people that have to be hired locally, a minimum wage that people have to be paid, putting in transit for any kind of building, urban gardens, all of these things support displacement. If you can get to your job in the area where you live, so the businesses and the homes and the industry have not been separated, or there's great transit between them, you're likely to stay in that area. But if you have to spend 2 hours to get to the jobs, you're going to move closer to where the job is. The same if there's no businesses in your neighborhood, if there's no schools in your neighborhood. These are some toolkits. Again, Jackie will send this around and you'll have all of these links. PolicyLink made a great equitable development toolkit. So it talks about code enforcement and how to do that, how to do local hiring, community land trust, where the trust owns the land, but you can build housing on it. So you can never sell the land for profit, keeping it always affordable. This is a list of all of the federal agencies that have something to do with disasters. We are not going to click on them. These are all clickable when you get the PowerPoint for those that are super geeky like me. I spent a lot of time in here and decided not to inflict it on you. But these are good ways to find out what each of these agencies are doing. And there may be hearings or times when you can get involved in looking at them as well. Just a couple that I want to pull out. HUD, I think that's super important for us. So a 90-day foreclosure moratorium for struggling homeowners if the mortgages are insured by the Federal Housing Administration. They can also help disaster victims who lost their homes buy a new one or rebuild. Congress approves emergency funding to support long-term disaster recovery, the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program. This tends to be a couple years behind. So 2020 right now, they're going to cover Hurricane Florence and Michael and the Paradise wildfires. So they're not up to date in that sense, the way FEMA is really responding immediately. I want to give you an example of some funding. So one of the things we do at my job is we track all of the disaster spending. And so in 2017, we know that FEMA gave out $15.6 billion. So 2017 was a lot of storms, there were wildfires, and there were floods. Top locations, Puerto Rico, Texas, Florida. This is Irma, Maria, Harvey, all those big floods. And then HUD, 2.7 billion. But most of that 2015 and 2016 disasters, which were much smaller. So when we do this report in November, you're going to see that HUD number go up significantly. No, we're almost out of time. So just a few other resources that I said I would mention. So the Institute for Diversity and Equity in Emergency Management tries to build social equity values into all emergency management work. Lots of resources, a really great place to check out. Black Emergency Managers Association. If you're interested in this as a career, this is a great way as well. They have a lot of, it's a blog more than anything else on their website, but lots of current issues and topics. And then the Bill Anderson Fund is a scholarship fund that Norma Anderson set up in honor of her husband. And it provides grants and scholarships to people working in emergency management who are African American or other people of color. And then just some resources from our website. You know, I was thinking when Kiara was talking about the different kinds of hazards, on our website, we have what we call issue insights, and that's a 101 look at every type of hazard, what people should do, what people should be thinking about in their community, especially in terms of funding. We have webinars, the Measuring the State of Disaster report that I mentioned, and we also have one on what households give, which turns out to be $3 billion a year towards disasters. And that is it. And Jackie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I assume that everyone who wanted to take the poll has taken the poll, which is 58 out of 76 people. So I'm going to end the poll and start a new poll and bring
The
Mark.
poll is not working, Jackie. What do you do if it won't allow you?
Well, you are unfortunately signed in as a panelist. Whose sign-in did you use?
Let's see, who was up there? I'm trying to remember now. Sean.
Okay, yeah, let me make you an attendee and then you'll be able to take the poll.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so I think Ferdinand's in the same situation. So I'm also gonna make you attendee, Ferdinand, because you're also stuck here with us in the panelist role. See if I can find you here. Well, actually, you're not. I think it's just because you were allowed to talk. So you still wouldn't take the poll. Okay, so good. Let me end the poll now and start a new poll and hand it over to Marcus. Okay. So.
Can you hear me, Jackie?
So, yep, I can. So let me, oh good, I can make you a co-host. I don't know why I couldn't make other people co-hosts. Okay, there you go.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate her for walking folks through. Make sure. Yep. All of the wonderful information that she had to share, particularly in walking people through. If you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. And I will finish this out with the presentation that talks a little bit about some of the other partners that you can engage as you continue to work in emergency management. And so let me just pull up Microsoft PowerPoint. And so while I'm pulling up Microsoft PowerPoint, I wanted to just get a quick sense, because I know, again, in a lot of ways, right, Florida is at the leading edge. You guys deal with disasters every year. If you had filed for disaster assistance in the past, could you just drop a 1 in the chat, just the number 1? Would love to know how many people have actually gone through some of the processes that she talked about in her presentation. So what I was saying is if you have filed for, if you've gone through the process of filing for disaster assistance, if you can drop a 1 in the chat box. If you haven't filed, that's okay. I just want to kind of get a sense of how many people have kind of been through some of the processes that she was talking about. Okay. Excellent. Okay, Jackie, one of the things I need to do, I'm actually going to drop out of the call and come right back in, and then I'll be able to give the presentation. I had to make a change on my settings, and it just needs me to log out and log back in.
Okay.
So I'll be right back on.
All right.
Okay.
Jackie, maybe while Marcus is doing that, someone had a question about what if you can't afford national flood insurance? And I answered, but I don't know if everybody can see the answer. And the fact is, you're kind of
Walking all place.
yeah, you know, you're stuck. You need there are some programs that are trying to buy flood insurance for people, but I'll admit that's why I don't have it right now. I couldn't afford it. Mine is a one-time payment, $600 to get flood insurance on my house, despite the fact that I'm 6 feet, my house is 6 feet above ground, but I'm physically 8 feet below sea level. So I'm at the lowest part of the city. And so, you know, we really need to invest in making it more affordable. The government should do that, because the more people that buy it, the less it's going to cost in the long-term end.
All right, I am back. And now, hello, Jackie?
Yes, we can
Okay,
hear you.
I'm back online.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you need to be made co-host again? Or
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're in something else. Okay, that's weird. Okay, hold on. There's 2 places where you are. All right. You've got it now. Oh, wait. Okay. So you should be all set.
Okay.
All right.
Alrighty. Our apologies about that, everybody. Okay. All right, so what we're going to talk about now is a little bit about some of the partners. And so the next section of the presentation for tonight are some of the private and nonprofit sector responses, and just walking you through some of the descriptions of the roles and contributions of the private sector and nonprofit organizations in emergency management, and then providing some examples of nonprofit professional organizations and academia for your branches and state conferences to engage with before, during, and after disasters. And then we'll end with a little bit of conversation about the role and functions of the private sector and government sector as it relates to the national response framework. And so before we get into so what you see here is on this initial slide, make sure. All right. So on the main slide, you see the different types of organizations that are considered under what we talk about in emergency management as whole community. And I think it was alluded to a little bit to this part in the prior part of this presentation. So of course you have some of the government partners from the state, tribal, territorial, and local level, as well as federal. And then you have the private sector, community-based organizations, and non-governmental organizations. And then you also have individuals, families, and households. And so the thing about the whole community approach is that all of the phases that we talked about earlier, all of the processes from prevention, protection, preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation, all have these parties involved in some form or fashion. And so, and this is some information that specifically comes from the Eye of the Storm Toolkit, that when we think about some of the considerations Some of this you've already heard before earlier today. You have different considerations in terms of community assets. So today's conversation has really been about some of the main structures, some of the key people from the government aspect, and some of the systems that folks engage with. And then we did a quick walkthrough of human caused disasters and natural disasters, and then be able to, and provided some links to connect with some additional specificity, but that's something that we can definitely walk through a bit deeper. And then of course, there's the different risks and vulnerabilities that are evident in some of the work. And so when we think about the community or whole community, taking an asset-based approach is always best. And so again, this also comes from the Eye of the Storm toolkit. So you're gonna have people, the natural environment, the built environment, and the economy. And I think one of the things that we're seeing tested during this time and in every disaster, right, is that the community assets, if they're not coordinated well, similar to the video that you've seen earlier, or if people are doing things independently and they're duplicating efforts, it makes it a lot harder for the community assets to lean towards helping to support an effective disaster response. And so one of the key groups that you'll hear a lot about, and you've probably heard a lot about already, it was in the video that was shared earlier, is the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. And so many people may not know that name, or you might have heard that name, VOAD, for the first time today. But some of the organizations that you may be familiar with include the American Red Cross, Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, as well as other organizations, Operation Hope. Those are examples of some of the national VOAD members that are involved in disasters and in the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. As you see here on the slide, just want to make sure you can see the slide, right, Jackie?
Yes. Sorry, I was on
Okay.
mute. Thanks. Oops, now it's on.
Okay. Okay. Let me
Okay.
correct you to make sure.
All right.
All right. Got it. Okay. So as you can see from the slide, there's actually 73 national organizations that are part of the national VOAD. They make up the members. You have 55 state and territory VOADs, and so the state of Florida does have a Florida Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, and then you have 21 partner organizations. So you've heard from some of those partner organizations tonight. They include Center for Disaster Philanthropy, they include Healthcare Ready, it also includes some of the corporate partners as well. And so UPS Foundation is a big partner there. And basically what this national entity is a collective, is kind of one of the main convening tables that from an emergency management aspect looks to coordinate across sectors to help meet the needs of people in communities before disasters and then disaster survivors when they're impacted. In terms of one of the things to note about this particular structure is at the state level. So there's not a such thing for, under this body, there's not a local VOAD as a formally recognized structure by the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. You will hear about local versions of it, but at the state level, so the state conference of the NAACP, for example, could join the Florida VOAD. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People can join the national VOAD. And those do have fees associated with membership. At the state level, it's a lot cheaper than it would be nationally. And again, I think if you're as branches and partners, so you can actually connect, and it's all organized state by state differently. So for the Florida VOAD, they may have different regions or jurisdictions that your branches can connect with. And so if you're down in Broward County, or you're in Miami-Dade County, or maybe you're on the Panhandle, reaching out to this organization at the state level, you may find other partners to connect with. You'll also see a lot of faith institutions. So you see here listed the Salvation Army, Catholic Charities. You also have the United Methodist Committee on Relief. What I'll say is I think a lot of NAACP, there may be NAACP members that are active in your branches and in your state conferences that are also members of some of these organizations, or at least affiliated with some of the denominations. And so we'll provide the link to the full page where you can see all of the member lists. I believe that the link is also in the Eye of the Storm toolkit as well. But that's a little bit about the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. I'll say one organization specifically that I want to kind of just lift up, and you've seen it in some prior presentation, is the American Red Cross. And so there may be some people that are already American Red Cross volunteers. You may partner with the American Red Cross in some of your community engagement activities. And some people that you may know are volunteering with the Red Cross or working with the Red Cross in the disaster context. The American Red Cross is a pretty substantial part of the public-private partnership when it comes to the emergency response and the national response framework. They are explicitly mentioned as one of the co-lead entities for what's known as Emergency Support Function 6, which talks a lot about when we say mass care, the sheltering, the feeding, the evacuation capabilities. And so again, it's not that anybody here is new to the Red Cross, but did just want to provide a little bit more context about why their role is so vast and so big. As a quasi-governmental organization, so it's not a formal governmental entity necessarily, but since its inception, it's been seen as an extension as part of one of the primary forms of government partnership. They do a lot of work to help make sure that they are providing mass care services separate and distinct from its role or from like the government's role as it relates to the national response framework. So when we talk about being the largest mass care service provider, again, I keep harping on that term because mass care service means a lot of different things, but that's when we talk about sheltering, about feeding, about evacuation. There's actually some guidance that was released recently that talks about providing mass care services in the context of a pandemic. So not specific to just COVID, but anytime there's a pandemic, considerations for states and locations. And that was a document developed by FEMA, but it had input and feedback from organizations like the Red Cross. I think the key thing here to note as well is that oftentimes when you think, or when you're speaking with state and local emergency managers and you're looking at the list of partners, this is one organization that you're going to see. They usually do their agreements through either a memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding. And so Red Cross does have both a memorandum of agreement, which is a non-financial, but just outlines kind of how they work together with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And because they're a quasi-federal government entity, they also have an interagency agreement to address certain issues. When you're looking at, again, the role of equity and of resilience, you'll find that the Government Accountability Office does provide recommendations on how to improve some of the role and work of the Red Cross and other organizations that are involved in mass care. So I just wanted to flag that there for you all if you had any additional questions. What I'll say is the structure is definitely national in scope, similar to FEMA. So they have entities at the regional level. They have local Red Cross chapters. And I know for the most part, right, I've always deemed them as an interested and engaged partner, but I think similar to just any other large national entity, making sure that there's that engagement up front always helps on the back end. And I do recognize and understand that the NAACP for years has had a formal relationship with the Red Cross in various capacities, both pre and post disaster. So flagging that there. So outside of the VOAD network, which is traditionally what we want to do, is the All Healers Mental Health Alliance. Are traditionally what when people typically think about emergencies and disasters, particularly in the response context, a lot of what you hear in disaster response is based on what's associated, again, with work that the Red Cross may do. You think about some of the first responders, firefighters, police officers, things like that. But one of the graphics that was shown earlier talks about just kind of the journey that we go through individually and collectively in experiencing trauma. And the All Healers Mental Health Alliance is a group of professionals representing majority Black, African-American professional associations that are focused on pre and post all types of hazards and disasters, the care and well-being of people of color. And so again, the All Healers Mental Health Alliance, similar to the National Voluntary Organization of Disasters, is a collection of different organizations. So we think about the Black Psychologists Association, the Black Psychiatrists Association, the National Association of Black Social Workers, National Black United Front. I'm gonna forget a bunch of names here, the National Baptist Convention USA, but those are examples of some of the national organizations, but they also have local networks that are always, again, regardless of crisis, providing culturally competent mental health professionals or mental health services. And they've been very active partner both on the national level alongside agencies like FEMA, but continue to be active long after the cameras are gone in locations and communities that are dealing with the long-term effects of trauma post-disaster. I think about the SHAPE Center in Houston, Texas, as one example of an entity that's a part of that broader network. And so as your branches and locations are thinking about, again, taking those steps through the different parts of the disaster assistance, or excuse me, the different phases of disasters, if you're looking for partners in the mental health capacity, this is one network of organizations that would be a very valuable piece of that puzzle in terms of just making sure that we are being mindful of the mental, emotional, and spiritual care in some instances when disasters happen. One of the other groups that I wanted to call out for folks, and so I think you heard some great examples in the presentation from Center for Disaster Philanthropy, from the Bill Anderson Fund, which provides great opportunities for people who are looking for pathways in academia for emergency management. You heard about the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management, which I am an advisory board member of, which is very much committed to helping state and local emergency managers and practitioners make connections with organizations like the NAACP to help improve outcomes as it relates to racial equity and making sure that we are mindful and just cultural competency. And then you heard about the Black Emergency Managers Association, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum, helping people not just go through the pipeline into academia or into the profession, but connecting people directly with jobs and other resources. There's another entity, many of you may be familiar with some of the institutions, but you actually have a collection of historically Black colleges and universities that are in the business of helping to support and provide research support, capacity building support as it relates to disasters. And so this is a group, a part of the Extension Disaster Education Network. As your branches or your state conference are thinking about who are the different type of partners who can help you assemble and execute on some of the plans that you may come up with over the next 3 days. These are just some places to start. So since we are doing a training for the state of Florida, I want to call out explicitly, Florida A&M University has an official or has an office that is committed to this particular education network. And so here's a little bit about their goals and what they're intended to do. And this is actually a program that's directly supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's program. And so there's a specific program called the Extension Disaster Education Network, and within that network is a little bit about these 1890 advisory group members. The key thing to know about, and for some of you that are already connected to universities or to colleges, some of the roles that they play when we talk about that response context, I'll say a big role that they play is definitely providing some of that front-end research, serving as conduits to doing some of the capacity building programs, providing training or providing spaces for trainings and things of that nature. But they're increasingly being seen as multi-sector partners, not just for capacity that they may lend in terms of some of the mass care functions that are needed, but also being leaders in helping to work with other organizations to build solutions that address some unique issues to communities. And so that is what I want us to flag there. The key thing to note is that the only historically Black colleges and universities that are a part of this group are explicitly tied to the 1890 land grant university program. And so those are the institutions that were designated, given a special designation in 1890 as it relates to just the services that they provide. And so usually you have a good bit of the A&Ms or most of the HBCU A&Ms that are a part of that network, as well as other universities, including Langston, Alcorn State, and others. So, but for example, Howard University would not be an example of an organization that's a part of this network because they are not a land grant university. Neither would Hampton University as well. And so that's it for the nonprofit side of the equation. A little bit on the private sector side of it. So Healthcare Ready, Center for Disaster Philanthropy, some of those other groups, and then we'll jump into this final portion to just walk you through some of the policies that may be useful for later. But when we talk about some of the private sector partnership opportunities, I'll say there's 3 things that I want to call out. I think one, when we think about the role of the private sector in the national response framework, a lot of the programs that we were talking about are very much in line with, from a private sector perspective, you may see some private sector organizations providing maybe small disaster relief grants or providing small seed funding to do certain projects. And so the Home Depot Foundation, Lowe's Foundation, for example, may provide some additional funding to help with rebuilding supplies. But you also have seen an increasing role of the private sector coordinating on the front end. And so part of what Kanaya talked about in just her and some of the prevention and some of the protection work is ultimately when private sector organizations are coming to the table, they're coming not just to offer grants, but also offer up information. And so when we think about the different capacities of supply chain networks, for example, so Healthcare Ready is an example organization that is very involved and engaged with medical suppliers and the healthcare supply chain, and ensuring that distribution and collection of personal protective equipment is being disseminated, keeping a tab on medical supplies. So you think about pharmacies. When we talk about the role of the private sector in the national response framework and the national response plan broadly, we're thinking about the entire suite of services that the private sector provides. And so it's just that's a piece that very much falls in to the framework itself. I think that there was a pretty decent walkthrough of kind of like what that framework does and some of the programs that are associated with it from the government side. And so you heard a little bit about individual assistance and public assistance. Those are both programs that are offered kind of as a result or activated as a response of activating certain parts of that framework as well. And so I just wanted to close with a brief mention, knowing that this is the Environmental and Climate Justice Program that's helping to host this policy or help host the training and get people thinking about some of the policy implications. There still are federal climate resilience and climate resilience policies on the books that have environmental justice implications. And so just wanted to point those out for folks before we transition over to Q&A. And so here is the list. I'm not going to walk through each one of these point by point. What I will say is that you still do have some footprint and a little bit of information that if you are looking at a lot of what we're talking about from a climate perspective, climate adaptation, climate change, climate resilience, there's a lot of different titles for different aspects of it, and they all mean slightly different things. But this is a collection from a federal perspective of what's on the books. But what we also know is that you're going to find continued policies being developed at the state and local level. And you see some of the changes happening, maybe not saying climate resilience explicitly, but having very explicit implications. So for example, I know for the state of Florida, there's been a lot of conversation around building codes and where things and where houses get built, or for houses that were built in certain places, what protections or what kind of information or resources are available to those homes already built in places that are susceptible to certain type of risk caused by climate change. And so again, these are examples of federal policies, but you're going to have some of those state and local policies that play out as well. The thing that I appreciate again about a lot of the tools that you already have at your disposal and access to is it does a pretty good job of kind of walking you through some questions to ask when you're meeting with emergency managers, both at the local and state level, not just from the emergency management traditional aspect where like I sit, but across all of the intersections that many members of the NAACP represent, which include some of the climate considerations and climate adaptation considerations as well. So with that, I want to make sure that we have more than enough time for questions. This last slide kind of just gives some examples. Clearly one of them that you already know, but there's a few other places that provide you links to information that talks a little bit more about climate resilience, and specifically in some instances, right, the relationship between climate resilience and disaster response. And so, but no, so that is it for that part of the presentation. Want to pause and defer to Jackie for additional questions.
Thank you so much. Oh, wow. I just watched how dark it is here. Okay. So, okay. So thank you so much, Marcus. I do want to have time for Q&A and also a few logistical things so that we don't get into this situation that we're in when we come back tomorrow. But so in answer to the last question on the chat, yes, we've set up a Dropbox folder that is going to have all the presentations that you've heard, as well as some other resource materials, including making sure there's access to In the Eye of the Storm toolkit and some other, and then also there's going to be a contact list so that, you know, any of the resource folks that you might want to be in touch with afterwards. So everyone is going to get a link to the Dropbox, so you have access to all of that. So we want to open it up for Q&A. You could either write in the chat any questions you have. You can write in the Q&A sections any questions you have, and you can, or you can raise your hand if you want to actually speak your questions. So one person in the Q&A asked, can you please repost information about the Land Grant University Response Network? What's the name of that again?
Sure. So I will drop the link in the chat. They actually have a great action plan that maps out for the HBCU some specific things that they're focused on as it relates to emergency management. And so I'll drop a link to that action plan in the chat. But the umbrella organization is called the Extension Disaster Education Network Program. So I'll drop that in the chat, Jackie, and then we can take the next question.
Thank you. Any other questions that we want to put in the chat, or does anyone wants to raise their hand? Feel free. Otherwise, let's see. Okay. So, well, while you're thinking about that, one quick question is, is there anyone else who's still taking the poll? Because otherwise I'm going to put up the third poll. If there's no one else. It looks like they're still holding at 68. So I assume you would let me know if someone was still taking the poll. And again, anyone who wasn't able to take the poll, we're going to send the links to the Google quiz. And you'll be able to take it that way. So, and we'll contact you if with your results. So don't worry about that, Ms. Diane. All right, so I'm ending that poll, starting a new poll. And also just a couple logistical announcements while people are thinking if they have any other questions of any of our panelists. So a couple of things. One is, we don't want to have a situation again tomorrow where people are using other people's login because it's a pretty big, massive confusion in terms of making sure everybody gets credit, and there's no guarantees at this point because it's such a situation. But we're gonna try to reconcile what you put in the chat with whatever and try to figure it all out. But we can't have that. So two things that we need to make sure everybody does, because we had as I said before, I put it in the chat, but we had a number of people who we know we had 300 people register in general, but we only had maybe 70 people at this point or so who handed in their certificates. So only the people who handed in their certificates are going to be considered to be in line for the certification. So I want to make sure that's clear. But the other thing is that there is another opportunity to do the training and be in line for the certification after you've handed in your FEMA certificate. And if there's any barrier to doing the FEMA course and doing the final exam, then we'll help you through that. That's why we set up those 2 sessions on the weekend to walk people through that test, because we didn't want that to be a barrier for anyone. But if anyone still has a barrier who's on the call, let us know, and you can be in the next round of people to be a part of this certification program. But this certification program is only for the people who handed in their certificates. And you can't hand your certificates after the training and then catch up, because the idea is that people are going to have the certificate coming into this training, and then we go from there. So that's one thing everybody needs to know. Secondly, everyone should, that there were a number of people who sent their certificates in but didn't register for this training. So they didn't register on the Zoom platform for this training. So that's why a number of people didn't get their login, because they didn't register on the Zoom link. And so if there are people who registered on the Zoom link and didn't get and also you should know that all of the registrations went out today. I mean, all of the approvals went out today with the Zoom links. So if you didn't get that, but you did sign up on the Zoom platform, then let me know. But there was two things that you needed to do: both send your certificates in to ecjp@naacp.org and sign up on the Zoom registration. So yeah, and so I see a question: if having received the certificate, if my certificate is dated before the training, can I still take the training? Yes, definitely. So if as long as people took the final exam and passed the final exam, some people just forwarded that email that said you'll receive your certificate in 1 to 2 days. That was good enough. So that's totally fine. Okay, so are there any other logistical questions? Otherwise, okay. All right, yeah. And so with the poll, so we have 29 out of 77. Anybody who kind of got dropped off the poll, again, don't worry, because you're going to have another chance to take the exam, because we're going to send a Google Doc with that you can take the exam on the Google Doc. So don't worry about that. So we'll send. I mean, we were hoping that Kathy would have reached her destination by now, so she would have sent those links, because I definitely can't find them. But since she hasn't, we'll email it to you so you can take the Google quiz if you weren't.
Jackie, I'm sorry, I did make it, but I'm sure I would never be able to find those links either.
Oh, really?
Not in this short time period.
Okay. Can you? I mean, if you, it should be. Do you have? It's attached to your Google.
Okay, I'll look
Okay.
quick. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, there will be quizzes each night. There'll be quizzes for each and every session, because again, we really want to standardize this and make sure that that we have the rigor that kind of proves the validity and the value of this certification program to any outsiders that might be looking to use it. So people are asking when we're getting the quiz. That's what Kathy's looking for now. So Kathy has reached her destination. She's gonna look for the. Thank you so much, President Haley. You're always so positive and encouraging. I wish I could just put you in my pocket and bring you out when I'm discouraged, because you were just a blessing in that way. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's see. If participants registered during the early stages of training, did they have to re-register for the Zoom training? No, you did not. You did not. And in fact, I remember, Sister Slater, that I did your approval, so you should have gotten the link. So I'm not sure. So what if you didn't take the quiz on yesterday? You mean the final exam, or do you mean the quizzes that we did during the session? Yesterday we just did a walkthrough of the final exam. If you haven't done the final exam yet, then you should really go into the next training, not this training, because the final exam is a prerequisite for even beginning this training. Yeah, so any questions for the presenters, for Kanaya or Marcus or Tanya? Okay, I see we have 50 polls in so far. Trying to get back up to that 68. The final exam, there's 2 final exams for both of the, yes, they were excellent. So there's 2 final exams, one for each of the prerequisite courses. Hopefully everybody knows about the prerequisite courses. Tori, if you're still there, can you put the links to the prerequisite courses in? Yeah, it was a lot, President Haley. It definitely was a lot. Oh, wow, now this is going fast. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I think so. Some of the certificates came in kind of like right before this started, and our poor beleaguered administrative manager was trying to enter them all in real time, but that was a real scramble. The many that she got just right before this was starting, and even after it started, so that was just not really super feasible, especially since I don't know if people are aware, but there's a nationwide cell phone outage. So that also made the internet access a little bit challenging. So that's why people weren't getting them if they were putting them in at the very last minute. So yeah, so the two trainings were the, oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Fernandez, we appreciate it. So the two trainings were the intro to CERT and the civil rights and disaster assistance. Oh yes, thank you, Tori. Thank you so much. Okay, yeah. So the person who didn't, I don't know if this is actually Alfred Norton or one of Alfred Norton's aliases, but yeah, as long as you send in the 2 emails that you got after you finished the 2 exams where it said congratulations, then you're fine. Like, you know, because yeah. But if you didn't get that email that said congratulations and we'll send the certificate in 2 days, then yeah, that's where you might need help. Thank you. I hope that's actually you, Brother Lewis. I mean, you also had a couple aliases, but thank you for the affirmation on behalf of the whole crew here. Any other questions? Oh, I see a few in the Q&A. Oh, okay, wow. All right, so someone okay, there's a couple of logistics. I was asking about the name of the land-grant university network, not the one for HBCUs. I want to compare them for equity purposes. That was from Ms. Jackson Marcus.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I'll drop the name of the Extension Disaster Education Network. I'll put the link to it.
All right.
Yep.
Then someone asked if protection and preparedness are used interchangeably for the phases of emergency management. That's a question from Mr. Jones.
I'm sorry, could you ask that question one more time, Jackie?
Protection, he said, presume protection and preparedness are used interchangeably for the phases of emergency management.
No.
Yeah, they should be considered separate. So I think typically you'll find people in casual conversation, they may conflate the two. But when they release the different frameworks or the mission areas, when we talk about prevention and protection, they aren't the same thing. And then when you think about just preparedness as a broad concept, that's more of an action step that can be taken for all of them. But yeah, in terms of the phases of emergency management, it's the 5 that we mentioned earlier are the mission areas. So you have prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. I don't know if that completely answers the question, but.
Okay.
Jackie, did you get the quizzes?
Oh, let me see. Gosh, I'm dealing with the chat and the Q&A. So let me see. Now I'll switch over to email. Yes. So I will put the quizzes in the chat.
Jackie, there's a question about land trust versus land banks. And my understanding is that they're the same, just a different model of doing it. But the toolkit might dive into that a little more.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just dealing with this the quizzes situation.
And you're disappearing into the dark, girl.
It is getting dark here. It's super dark. All right. So I'm going to put the quizzes into the chat. This is going to be quiz number 1. Oh, thank you, Mr. Norton. And yes, there is another poll. Is everyone finished with the existing poll? Is there anyone who's still working on this poll? We've got 60 answers. Okay, assuming that no one else is working on the poll, I'm going to close it out and put the last poll up. I think it's the last poll. Yeah, it's the last poll. Okay, assuming no one's working on it, I am closing it out, ending poll, and opening the last poll, which is short. Well, it's 4 questions. Well, no, 3 questions, I think. Yeah.
And then to respond to Daniela's question, so I did drop the link in there. There is a that provides some definition and a bit more context behind the role of a land bank as opposed to a community land trust. I'm going to run out of subject expertise pretty quickly beyond that, but I did just want to make sure that Daniela knew that the link was available in the chat, and I can send it to you, Jackie, or to whoever if they want to follow up with that for more information. But it does give kind of just some description of both of those.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Sorry, I'm cutting and pasting these quizzes in. So I just put quiz number 1. Here's quiz number 2. And in answer to the question, the quizzes would ideally be turned in by tomorrow, like before it starts tomorrow, because then you're going to get a whole nother quiz and a whole nother set of polls and so forth. So that's quiz number 2. Sorry about that. And oh yeah, poll number 2 is not quite complete. Let me read you the whole thing. Not sure what happened to it, but everyone, the question number 2 on this quiz is the All Healers Mental Health Alliance consists of local and national networks of culturally competent mental professionals and allied associations. I don't know where I leave out. And yeah, so you missed allied associations. So that's what was missing there. Sorry about that. True or false? So yeah, if everyone could finish. So this quiz that I just put in was quiz number 2, and I'm just going to put in quiz number 3. I don't think, Kathy, are you working on quiz number 4 or not really?
No.
Okay. All right. So
I guess I could go back and try and find it and put it in real quick. I'm not sure what happened to number 2. That's 6 and 7, and we didn't have a 6 or 7. It was correct when I first sent it to you, huh?
I get you mean. I think.
When I first sent you the link right back then, it was all 5 questions on there.
Oh. I don't. Don't worry about it. I don't know if I even looked last time when you said it. Any other, are these quizzes, polls, or what? I'm confused now. Okay, so the polls are the same questions as the quiz, but the idea is that some people have problems with the poll, and some people are not even online now. People are on the phone. So we wanted to make sure, so you have a choice of doing the polls or the quizzes. If you've already done all the polls, then you don't have to do the quizzes. The quizzes are just for people who did not do the polls. Hopefully that's there. Okay, so quiz number 3 is here. And Kathy is trying to finish quiz number 4 for you. But if people can't hold on for that, we'll also send it out over email. The only challenge is the confusion about who you all are. So it'd be great if you held on. There is not another poll. This is the 4th and last poll. There's just another quiz. You are not, Dr. Reed. You're logged in as President Haley. sign up if you complete all 4 polls? Yes, you can. And thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, Mr. Campbell. How will we know if we pass? So, yes, we will eventually, by the end of by the end of this week, I will say, because there's a lot to sort out from this situation today. But by the end of this week, we'll let you know if you passed. No worries, Brother Jerome. I will get you approved because I got your certificates in the middle of this whole thing. Thank you for having a sense of humor, Zebby Atkinson. We appreciate that deeply. All right, link to the 4th poll. So this is the 4th poll. The link to the 4th quiz is in development. Kathy is working on that now. The quiz you posted here starts with number 3. The quiz 1 posted here starts with number 3. Oh, okay. I don't know. I don't know about that situation. Have I posted all the polls? I posted all the polls, but the quiz links, there's only 3 out of the 4 quizzes. Where is question 1 and 2? Oh, okay. Are you talking about the, no, I'm confused. Can I end my session? I complete all the quizzes. Yes, if you complete all the polls, all 4, then yes, you are very free to get on with your life. Thank you very much. This is poll number 4. So you don't see a poll right now, Barbara Melvin? Thank you, Mr. Walker. Have a good night. Sleep well. See you tomorrow night. Okay. Well, Ms. Melvin, you can take, oh, okay, never received either of them. Okay, so Ms. Melvin, you can take quiz 4 via the link when it, if you don't want to wait for it now, then we'll send it via email. And to the person who needs help, yes, we will help. Never fear. Okay. Bon appetit, Tanya. There is a link that says quiz 3. If you scroll up, Mr. Ford. Okay. Yes, I can't confirm right now, but I will confirm. But I'm not sure when. Okay, to be clear, we don't have to take the quiz if we complete all 4 polls. That's absolutely true, Diane. Okay. Quiz 1 is showing 2 times. Interesting. You mean quiz? You mean in the chat box, or so I didn't put a number 2 for quiz 2. I just put quiz 1, and then I put quiz 2. That's okay, Mr. Ford. You're not being difficult at all. It's a lot of confusion. I'm impressed that you all are hanging in here with some level of humor, although I can't really tell in some ways. But yes. So Mr. Ford, I'm gonna try to figure out where I can see your polls. And I'll let you know for sure if you've done all 4. Okay, great, Carol. Good night. Thank you. Okay, bye, Kanaya. Take care. Have a good night.
Hey, everyone.
Okay. All right. So good night, Barbara, as well. Yes. Okay. Have a good night, Mr. Ford. Thank you. And I'm sure you did all 4 polls. And yeah, so we'll definitely send the link to all 4 quizzes to everyone. And at this point, I'm the only one who knows if you've taken all the polls, for better or worse. Good night, President Haley. Thank you so much. Oh no, I'm sorry. Good night, Dr. Reed. Take care. Okay, good, Ryan. You complete all the polls. Awesome. Have a good night then. And Alfred Norton or whomever, you complete all 4 polls. That's great too. And you're not sure if it was done on your name. I'm not either because I'm not sure what your name is. but if you're Alfred Norton, you're all set. If you're not, then yeah, it probably looks like somebody else. How many polls you have from me? Sheila. Oh, who's it? Okay, wait. It's going so fast I can't even see what. Oh wow, this is really, there's a lot of comments here. All right, let me scroll back up. To be clear, we don't have to, okay, we already said that. Yep, quiz one. They're not downloading. Interesting. And, okay. Well, so we have 60 people who have taken, oh, okay, good. I guess we're done with the polls. Good, so I'll end the polling. Good. So I will, Kathy, do you have, oh wow, it is dark. I'm sorry. Let me turn on my light so it doesn't look so weird. But Kathy, do you have an ETA on the 4th?
Yeah, I am so tech challenged. I did it and it was easier the last time, and now I have no idea. I've been struggling.
Okay. So, all right.
I had to give up the first time I did it, so I'm going to sit here until I figure it out.
All right. So everyone, I think we're going to have to send out that 4th quiz link via, okay, great. Kimberly, you finished all 4 polls, but it's probably under your sister's name. You're Raquel, but it's under Kimberly's name. Okay. Good to know. We've saved this chat, so I'll just go back through and cross-reference all of this. And that's fantastic, Sheila, that you complete all the polls. Hopefully they're submitted. I don't know if I can repost polls. Let me see. Relaunch polling. Oh yeah, I guess I can. Okay, so I'll relaunch number 3 for the sake of Alfred Norton or whoever the Alfred Norton imposter is. Relaunch the poll will clear existing poll results. Okay, nope, I won't do that. All right, so sorry everyone. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send out, but I'll repost the link to quiz number 3, so you have that. And we're eventually going to also have quiz number 4, but we're gonna send that out to you over email.
I just figured out how to do quiz number 4.
Oh, okay. Do you know what
I Googled it.
Do you think it'll be done soon?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's gonna take me a
Okay. All right. All right. So everyone, we're going to send out quiz number 4. But for the Alfred Norton person, if that's you, I will repost the link to quiz number 3, but everyone's gonna have to wait for quiz number 4. Any other questions folks have? Okay. Then I think we are pretty much done. Let me just put this quiz number 3. Oh, there's 9 new messages I missed. Okay, I'm so sorry. There's a lack of scrolling that went on. Please forward all. Okay, yeah. Hopefully your email address is in the. Okay, so let me just send this to everybody really quickly. This is the link to quiz number 3, for the sake of anyone who missed that. Quiz number 3, and this is the link. And I'll also just do the other 2 just in case. So quiz number 2 is also coming. Hold on. I guess this is quiz number 2. Okay. Quiz number 2. And I guess this is quiz number 1. Nope, this is quiz number 2. All right. Quiz number 2. And then quiz number 1. Kathy, you think that the one that is unlabeled is quiz number 1, right? All right, we just doing that. All right.
Yeah. I have no idea. I'd have to go back.
Okay, that's all right. That's good. So
we're trying to 4. I don't want to lose it.
Yes, I got it. All right, so we'll
I'm
so
sorry. Really suffering from without not having my laptop, only having my iPad.
oh yeah, that's understandable. All right, Franklin, Ms. Franklin, if you have taken the 4 polls, then you are good. You don't have to worry about the quizzes or anything. As long as you are Ms. Franklin. Okay, yeah, you signed your name. So yeah. So yes, you're good to go, Ms. Franklin. All is well. Let me make sure I didn't miss any other questions that I can actually answer. I think I responded to most of the questions that were in the chat. Oh yeah, thanks, Tori. Appreciate it. One of the quiz number 1 starts with question number 3, and one starts with 6. Oh, you know, that's because, yeah. So that's because, don't worry about that. It doesn't matter about the numbering. Yes, it doesn't matter about the numbering. That it's a long story, but suffice it to say, it's not missing anything. It's just because originally all the questions were on one document, and I think Kathy just cut and pasted them as they were or something. So yeah, you're not missing anything. She put them all in. You have all the questions. It's all good. Okay. So now you need 4. Well, yeah, so quiz number 4 is coming, but we're gonna send it via email. And just to clarify, is this Mr. Knowlton, or is there somebody else signing it as Mr. Knowlton? No, actually you, Alfred Knowlton. Or no, it's not. Sorry. All right, well, oh, okay, Bobby Smith. Yes, good old Bobby Smith Powell. Okay, good. Thanks, Doc. So we'll make sure you get it. We'll use your actual email address. So. Thank you, everyone. So I think we're done. We only have 34 people left. You're also good to be still hanging on. So if there are no other questions, Tori's answered the logistical ones. I've answered others. Yes, tomorrow has to be better. It couldn't be any worse. So thank you for that. that vote of confidence, Dr. Bobby Smith Powell. Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Tonight has been great. Thank you, Jackie.
Oh, thank you. You're very gracious. All right. Well, thanks everybody. And we look forward to tomorrow. It really, really does have to be much better tomorrow. So we look forward to it. Yeah, I don't know about this nationwide phone outage. Someone
That's
said
what got me right when we were coming on, Jackie. I never said anything.
yes, that was crazy. Tanya called it denial of service, and that sounded severe, but I didn't know what she meant by that. Yeah.
And I really didn't know until someone texted me. I said, oh my God. And then when I couldn't make, so
yeah, that's right.
All good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's some carriers, not all.
Yeah, it's at least Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon.
Okay, I think AT&T someone said. Yeah, because I'm T-Mobile.
So that's pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, because I've been down. I was on and then down.
Okay, it wasn't just me and T. I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, because I tried calling you, Kathy, like 10 times, maybe 15. And I tried you on both of my phones, my personal and my work phone. So, oh, Brother Sabu, hey, good to hear from you.
That's right.
Anyway, all right. Well, I think we're good.
All right.
This time, going back and forth, copying and pasting, I lost the 4th quiz, so now I gotta look for it. This is so frustrating.
Oh, thank you for your patience.
Now this time I'm gonna copy it and paste it and put it on my notes if I can ever find it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for sticking.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, board member Chair Eglin. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks, Marcus, for hanging till the end. And thanks everyone else, all 17 attendees. But we're gonna mercifully let you go now. Good night, everyone.